Italian union and was not nearly so cleverly camouflaged for clandestine evening activities. It was late October, and Trenton was enjoying the death throes of Indian summer. Ranger and I were squatting behind a hydrangea bush, and we weren't enjoying Indian summer, each other's company, or much of anything else. We were following a tip that Kenny Mancuso was scheduled to visit his girlfriend, Julia Sinetta. Kenny Mancuso had recently been charged with shooting a gas station attendant, who also happened to be his former best friend, in the knee. Mancuso had posted a bail bond via the Vincent Plum Bonding Company, ensuring his release from jail and returning him to the bosom of polite society. After his release, he'd promptly disappeared, and 3 days later failed to show face at a preliminary hearing. This did not make Vincent Plum happy. Since Vincent Plum's losses were my windfalls, I saw Mancuso's disappearance from a more opportunistic perspective. Vincent Plum is my cousin and my employer. I work for Vinny as a bounty hunter, dragging felons who are beyond the long arm of the law back into the system. Dragging Kenny back was going to net me 10% of his $50,000 bond. A portion of that would go to Ranger for assisting with the takedown, and the rest would pay off my car loan. Ranger and I had a sort of loose partnership. Ranger was a genuine, cool-ass numero uno bounty hunter. I asked him to help me because I was still learning the trade and needed all the help I could get. His participation was in the ballpark of a pity fuck. We'd been squatting there for 3 hours before the squatting finally took its toll on Ranger's good humor. "I don't think this is gonna happen, Stephanie." I was feeling defensive that maybe Julia had yanked my chain. "I spoke to Julia this morning, explained to her that she could be considered an accessory, and that made her decide to cooperate." "Not exactly. She decided to cooperate when I told her how before the shooting, Kenny had been sometimes seeing Denise Bartolowski." Ranger was smiling in the dark. "You lie about Denise?" "Yeah. Proud of you, babe." I didn't feel bad about the lie, since Kenny was a scumbag felon, and Julia should be setting her sights higher anyway. We turned silent as a pickup approached. It was a new Toyota 4x4, fresh off the showroom floor. Dark color, temporary plates, extra antenna for a car phone. The Toyota eased up at the Cape Cod and pulled into the driveway. The driver got out and walked to the front door. His back was to us and the lighting was poor. Ranger adjusted his gun belt. "What do you think? Is that Mancuso?" I couldn't tell from this distance. The man was the right height and weight. Mancuso was 21 years old, 6 feet tall, 175 pounds, dark brown hair. He'd been discharged from the Army 4 months ago, and he was in good shape. I had several pictures that were obtained when the bond had been posted, but they didn't do me any good from this angle. Could be him. I can't swear to it without seeing his face. The door of the house opened, and the man disappeared inside. Ranger stood up. "We could go, knock on the door nice and polite, and ask if he's the man." I nodded. That might work. We walked across the lawn. I was dressed in dark jeans, long-sleeved black turtleneck, navy Kevlar vest, and red Keds. I had my curly, shoulder-length brown hair tied in a ponytail, tucked under a navy ball cap. I wore my 5-shot .38 Smith & Wesson Chiefs Special in a black nylon webbed hip holster, with cuffs and a defense spray wedged into the back of the belt. Ranger rapped on the front door to the house. When no one answered, I stepped to the side and unholstered my revolver. Standard procedure for the backup partner. In my case, it was more or less an empty gesture. I religiously go to the range to practice, but I still harbor an irrational fear of guns. Most of the time, I keep my little Smith & Wesson empty of bullets so I won't accidentally blast the toes off my foot. On the one occasion I'd had to shoot somebody, I'd been so flustered I'd forgotten to take my gun out of my pocketbook before pulling the trigger. I wasn't eager to repeat the performance. Ranger rapped again, with more force. "Fugitive apprehension agent, open the door!" This drew a response, and the door was opened, not by Julia Sinetta or Kenny Mancuso, but by Joe Morelli, a Trenton Police Department plainclothesman. We all stood silent for a moment, everyone surprised to see everyone else. Ranger finally pointed to the driveway. "That's your truck." Yeah, I just got it." Ranger nodded. "Good-looking vehicle." Morelli and I were both from the Burg, a blue-collar chunk of Trenton where dysfunctional drunks were still called bums, and only pansies went to Jiffy Lube for an oil change. Morelli had a long history of taking advantage of my naivete. I'd recently had the opportunity to even the score, and now we were in a period of reevaluation, both of us jockeying around for position. I saw Julia peeking at us from behind Morelli. So what happened, Julia? I thought Kenny was supposed to stop around tonight. Yeah, right, like he ever does anything he says. Did he call? No call, nothing. He's probably with Denise Bartolowski. Why don't you go knock on her stupid door? Ranger stayed stoic, but I knew he was smiling inside. I'm out of here. Don't like to get involved in these domestic unpleasantries. Morelli had been watching me. He had his hands shoved into his jeans pockets. What happened to your hair? It's under my hat. Very sexy. Morelli thought everything was sexy. Julia started to shut the door. It's late. I gotta go to work tomorrow. I looked at my watch. It was 10:30. You let me know if you hear from Kenny? Yeah, sure. Morelli followed me out. We stopped next to his truck. I said, What are you doing here, Morelli? Same as you. Looking for Kenny. Mancuso's mother was a Morelli, and the family asked if I'd look for Kenny and talk to him before he got himself into any more trouble. Jesus, are you telling me you're related to Kenny Mancuso? Yeah, I'm related to everyone. Well, you're not related to me. He ignored me. You have any leads besides Julia? Nothing exciting. He gave that some thought. You know, Steph, we could work together on this. I raised an eyebrow. Last time I worked with Morelli, I'd gotten shot in the ass. Still, Kenny might be dumb enough to turn to family. How do I know you won't cut me out at the end? As he was sometimes prone to do. Morelli's face was all hard planes, the sort of face that started off handsome and gained character as it aged. He was 32, 2 years older than me. He was single, and he was a good cop. The jury was still out on its assessment of him as a human being. He grinned, rocking back on his heels. Guess you'll just have to trust me. Oh, boy. He opened the door to the Toyota, and new car aroma washed over us. He hitched himself up behind the wheel and cranked the engine over. Don't suppose Kenny will show up this late? I shook my head. Not likely. Julia's mother is a nurse on the night shift at St. Francis. She'll be home in half an hour, and I can't picture Kenny waltzing in when Mama's here. Morelli nodded and drove off. I walked to the far corner of the block where I'd parked my used Jeep Wrangler. Probably I was right about it being too late for Kenny to show, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to hang out a little longer and make sure. Sitting in my car didn't give me nearly as good a vantage point as the hydrangea bush, but it was okay for my purposes. After 10 minutes, a small hatchback passed by the SNETA house. I slunk down in my seat, and the car continued on. A few minutes later, it reappeared. It stopped in front. The driver beeped the horn. Julia SNETA ran out and jumped into the passenger seat. I rolled my engine over when they were half a block away. There was no traffic, making it easier to spot a tail, so I stayed far behind. The hatchback connected with Hamilton and headed east. I hung tight, closing the gap, now that the road was more traveled. I held this position until Julia and friend pulled into a mall lot and parked on the dark fringe. The lot was empty at this time of night. I cut my lights and eased into a parking place at the opposite end. I retrieved binoculars from the back seat and trained them on the car. I almost jumped out of my shoes when someone rapped on my driver's side door. It was Joe Morelli, enjoying the fact that he'd been able to catch me by surprise and scare the heck out of me. You need a night scope. You're not going to see anything at this distance in the dark. I don't got a night scope, and what are you doing here anyway? I followed you. Figure you'd watch for Kenny a while longer. You're not very good at this law enforcement stuff, but you're freaking lucky, and you've got the temperament of a pit bull with a soup bone when you're on a case. Not a flattering assessment, but dead accurate. So, Morelli, you wouldn't want to drive over there and say hello to your cousin. Hate to ruin Julia's good time if it isn't Kenny. We were both staring at the hatchback, and even without a night scope, we could see it had begun to rock. Rhythmic grunting sounds and whimpers carried across the empty lot. Morelli leaned against my door. Damn, if they don't pace themselves, they're going to kill the shocks on that little car. The car stopped rocking. The motor caught, and the lights flashed on. I shook my head. Geez, that didn't take long. Morelli hustled around to the passenger seat. Must have gotten a head start on the way over. Wait until he hits the road before you use your lights. That's a great idea, but I can't see without my light. You're in a parking lot. What's to see besides 3 acres of unobstructed macadam? I crept forward a little. I couldn't see jack shit. Morelli started making chicken noises. Then he said, You're losing him. Step on it. I mashed the gas pedal to the floor. There was a loud whomp, and the Wrangler pulled hard to the left and stopped. Morelli got out to take a look while I thrashed around in the driver's seat, sputtering and fuming and berating myself for listening to Morelli. Morelli leaned into the open window. Scuff break. You hit a safety island and bent your rim. You got road service? You did this on purpose. You didn't want me to catch your rotten cousin. Hey, Cupcake, don't blame me just because you made some bad driving decisions. You're scum, Morelli. Scum. I yanked the cell phone out of my pocketbook and called Al's Auto Body. Al and Ranger were good friends. During the day, Al ran a legitimate business. I suspected that at night he ran a chop shop, hacking up stolen cars. It didn't matter to me. I just wanted to get my tire fixed. An hour later, I was on my way. No sense trying to track down Kenny Mancuso. He'd be long gone. I stopped at a convenience store, bought a pint of artery-clogging coffee ice cream, and headed for home. I live in a blocky 3-story brick apartment building located a couple miles from my parents' house. Inside my apartment, my hamster, Rex, was running on his wheel, his feet a blur of pink. Howdy, Rex. Rex didn't say anything. He's the small, silent type. I popped the top on the ice cream container and listened to my phone messages while I ate. All of the messages were from my mother. She was making a nice roast chicken tomorrow, and I should come for dinner. I should be sure not to be late because Betty Sajak's brother-in-law died, and Grandma Mazur wanted to make the 7 o'clock viewing. Grandma Mazur reads the obituary columns like they're part of the paper's entertainment section. Other communities have country clubs and fraternal orders. The burg has funeral parlors. If people stopped dying, the social life of the burg would come to a grinding halt. I finished off the ice cream, gave Rex a few hamster nuggets, and went to bed. I woke up to rain slapping against my bedroom window. I liked the way rain sounded at night when I was snug in bed. I couldn't get excited about rain in the morning. I needed to harass Julia Sonetta some more, and I needed to run a check on the car that had picked her up. The phone rang, and I automatically reached for the portable at bedside, thinking it was early to be getting a phone call. The digital readout on my clock said 7:15. It was my cop friend, Eddie Gazzara. Gazzara and I had grown up together, and now he's married to my cousin Shirley. Morning, Steph. Time to go to work. Is this a social call? This is an information call, and I didn't make it. Are you still looking for Kenny Mancuso? Yeah. Well, Moogie Buas, the gas station attendant he nailed in the knee, got dead this morning. This put me on my feet. What happened? A second shooting. A customer found Moogie in the gas station office with a big hole in his head. Jesus! I thought you might be interested. I owe you, Eddie. Well, we could use a babysitter next Friday. I don't know you that much. Eddie grunted and disconnected. The gas station, Delio's Exxon, was on Hamilton, not far from my apartment. I stopped at a convenience store on the way and got a large coffee to go and a box of chocolate-covered donuts. There were a lot of cops and cop cars at the gas station, and an emergency rescue truck had backed itself up close to the office door. The rain had tapered off to a fine drizzle. I made my way through the crowd, taking my coffee and donuts with me, looking to spot a familiar face. The only familiar face I saw belonged to Joe Morelli. I sidled up to him and opened the donut box. He took a donut and shoved half in his mouth. No breakfast, Morelli? I thought you were working Vice. I am. Walt Becker is the primary here. He knew I was looking for Kenny and thought I'd want to be included. So what happened? The ME estimates time of death at 6:30, about when the victim would have been opening up. Apparently someone just walked in and blew him away. 3 shots to the face, close range. No indication of theft. No witnesses so far. Can he come back to shut him up? Maybe. You think Kenny do that? He shrugged. Hard to say what Kenny do. You run the plate on that car last night? Yep. It belongs to my cousin Leo. I raised an eyebrow. Morelli nodded. It's a big family. I'm not that close anymore. You talked to Leo? Yeah. He says he lent the car to Kenny, who promised to bring it right back but never showed. I explained to Leo how we'd been aiding and abetting a felon, and how a judge might look askance at such an activity, and how if he ever saw or heard from Kenny again, he should right away rat on him to his cousin Joe. You think he'll call if he hears from Kenny? No, I think Leo will beat the crap out of Kenny with a tire iron. It's the Morelli way? Something like that. So, now what? Julia Sonetta. I sipped some of the steaming coffee and watched his eyes lock onto the styrofoam cup. Bet you'd like to have some nice hot coffee. I'd kill for coffee. I'll let you have some if you let me tag along when you talk to Julia. Deal. I took one last sip and passed him the cup. Julia Sonetta worked in the bookstore at Trenton State College. Little frown lines appeared between her eyebrows when she saw us. I decided to let Morelli do the talking. He stared at the empty aisles. "Looks like a slow day." Julia nodded. "It's the rain." "Hear anything from Kenny?" Color crept into Julia's cheeks. "Actually, I sort of saw him last night. He called right after you left, and then he came over. I told him you wanted to talk to him." "Do you think he'll come back tonight?" She shook her head. "He said he wasn't coming back. He said there was people after him." "The police?" "I think he meant someone else, but I don't know who." Morelli gave her instructions to call him any time, day or night, if she heard from Kenny. She looked noncommittal, and I didn't think we should count on much help from Julia. We went out into the rain and hustled to Morelli's department car. It was an old tan Fairlane sedan with an antenna wired from the trunk and a hula doll stuck in the back window. He turned out of the campus, and I asked the inevitable question. "Now what?" "Well, let's run down what we have. What do we know about Kenny?" After last night, we knew he was a premature ejaculator, but that probably wasn't what Morelli wanted to hear. Local boy, high school graduate, enlisted in the Army, got out 4 months ago, still unemployed, but obviously not hurting for money. For unknown reasons, he decided to shoot his friend Moogie Buis in the knee. He got caught in the process by an off-duty cop. He had no priors and was released on bond. He violated his bond contract and stole a car. Wrong. He borrowed a car. He just hasn't gotten around to returning it yet. You think that's significant?" Morelli stopped for a light. "Maybe something happened to change his plans. Like acing old Moogie." "Acing Moogie doesn't feel right to me." "So, what's your theory?" "When Kenny and Moogie were questioned about the shooting, they both said it was over a personal issue and wouldn't discuss it. Maybe they had some bad business going on." And that's it. That's what I think." I stared at him for a moment, trying to decide if he was holding out on me. Probably he was. Morelli parked behind my Jeep. "There's something I need to tell you before you leave." "Yes?" "I hate those shoes you're wearing." I looked down at my Doc Martens. "Anything else?" "I'm sorry about your tire last night." "Yeah, right." A couple of days ago, the super had let me into Kenny's apartment while temporarily confused as to my law enforcement affiliation. I'd surreptitiously lifted a spare key while admiring the kitchen, and now I could tippy-toe around whenever I wanted to. I'd also lifted Kenny's little black book. I spent the afternoon going down the names in the book. By 5 o'clock I was cold and wet, but I'd gotten through the list. I'd done a combination of phone calls and face-to-faces, and had netted very little. No one admitted to having contact with Kenny after his arrest, but several people testified to his volatile personality and wheeler-dealer mentality. As my last effort of the day, I decided to check Kenny's apartment again. I went room to room in a cursory search and concluded Kenny hadn't returned since my last visit. I checked his answering machine. No messages. When I got back to the lobby, I went straight to the mailboxes and peeked into Kenny's. It was crammed full of stuff that might help me find Kenny. Stealing mail would be wrong, I told myself. But I had a key. Didn't that give me some rights? This was a great issue since I'd sort of stolen the key. I put my nose to the grate and looked inside. Phone bill. This might give me clues. I took a deep breath, rammed the key into the tiny keyhole, opened the mailbox, and shoveled the mail into my big black bag. My mother was peering out the storm door when I parked at the curb. "You're late." 2 minutes. I heard sirens. You weren't in an accident, were you? No, I wasn't in an accident. I was working. You should get a real job. Something steady with normal hours. Grandma Missouri was standing in the hall. She lived with my parents now that Grandpa Missouri was scarfing down his normal 2 eggs and a half a pound of bacon breakfast in the hereafter. She was 72 and didn't look a day over 90. "We better get a move on with this dinner if we're going to make the viewing." My mother brought the mashed potatoes to the table. "Come and eat before the mashed potatoes get cold." Grandma Missouri took her seat. "So, what'd you do today? You have to rough anybody up?" "I spent the day looking for Kenny Mancuso, but I didn't have much luck." My mother looked up at the name Mancuso. "Kenny Mancuso is a bum. All those Morelli and Mancuso men are trash. You can't trust a one of them." In the Burg, it is possible to be born into bumhood. The Morelli and Mancuso women are above reproach, but the men are jerks. They drink, they cuss, they slap their kids around, and they cheat on their wives and girlfriends. Grandma Missouri smoothed the front of her dress. "Sergi Morelli will be at the viewing with the KFC. I could grill him for you. I'd be real sneaky about it, too. He's always been kind of sweet on me, you know." Sergei Morelli was 81 years old and had a lot of bristly gray hair coming out of his ears that were half the size of his withered head. I didn't expect he knew where Kenny was hiding, but sometimes bits and pieces of seemingly benign information turned out to be useful. "How about if I come to the viewing with you? We can grill Sergei together." She shrugged. "I guess that would be okay. Just don't cramp my style." There are 5 funeral homes in the Burke. Grandma Missouri told me on the way over that she was glad that Betty Sajak's brother-in-law, Danny Gunzer, was laid out at the Stevas mortuary. She said, "When I die, you make sure I'm taken to Steva. I don't want that no-talent Mazel laying me out. He don't know nothing about makeup. Steva is the best. If you're anybody at all, you go to Steva." Steva's was on Hamilton, in a large converted Victorian sporting a wraparound porch. Grandma Missouri had decided she couldn't do a good job of worming information out of Sergei Morelli in her standard fare tennis shoes. She was now precariously teetering on black patent leather heels, which she assured me all babes wore. I took a firm grip on her elbow and ushered her up the stairs to the lobby, where the Knights of Columbus were massing in their fancy hats and sashes. Constantine Steva had set up in the funeral business 30 years ago. Lately, his stepson, Spiro, had begun making undertaker noises, hovering at Constantine's side. Death was clearly Constantine Steva's life. It seemed more a spectator sport to Spiro. Mary Lou Molnar's little sister went to grade school with Spiro and reported to Mary Lou that Spiro had saved his fingernail clippings in a glass jar. Spiro was small and dark, with hairy knuckles and a face that was dominated by nose and sloping forehead. He looked like a rat on steroids, and this rumor about the fingernail saving did nothing to enhance his image. He'd been friends with Moogie Buas, and I'd spoken to him briefly while working my way through Kenny's little black book. Spiro's response had been politely guarded. Yes, he'd hung with Moogie and Kenny in high school, and yes, they'd stayed friends. No, he couldn't think of a motive for either shooting. No, he hadn't seen Kenny since his arrest and hadn't a clue as to his whereabouts. Spiro stood directing traffic in a conservative dark suit and crisp white shirt. Grandma looked him over as one would a cheap imitation of good jewelry. "Where's Con?" In the hospital. Herniated disc. Happened last week." "No. Who's taking care of business?" "Me. I pretty much run the place anyway, and then Louie's here, of course." "Who's Louie?" "Louie Moon. You probably don't know him. He works mornings, and sometimes he drives." A young woman pushed through the front door and caught Spiro's eye, and Spiro did his official undertaker nod of greeting. The young woman nodded back. Grandma elbowed Spiro. "Looks like she's interested in you." Spiro smiled. "A lot of women are interested in me. I'm a pretty good catch." He spread his arms wide. "This will all be mine someday. I'm thinking of expanding, maybe franchising the name." Grandma dug an elbow into my side. "You hear that, Stephanie? Isn't it nice to find a young man with ambition?" If this went on much longer, I was going to Ralph on Spiro's suit. I said, "We're here to see Danny Gunzer. Nice talking to you, but we should be running along before the KFC takes up all the good seats." "I understand perfectly. Mr. Gunzer's in the green room." Betty Sajak and her sister were standing at the open casket. Grandma Missouri rushed forward and put her purse on a folding chair in the second row. Her place secured, she wobbled up to Betty Sajak and made her condolences. Conversation ceased as the KFC made its appearance. The men moved forward 2 by 2, and Grandma Missouri went up on tiptoe, pivoting on her patent leather spikes to get a good look. Her heel caught in the carpet, and Grandma Missouri pitched back, her body board stiff. She smacked into the casket before I could get to her, flailing with her arms for support, tipping over a large milk glass vase of gladioli onto Danny Gunzer, clonking him square in the forehead. Water sloshed into Gunzer's ears and dripped off his chin, and gladioli settled onto Gunzer's suit in colorful confusion. Everyone stared in speechless horror, half expecting Gunzer to jump up and shriek, but Gunzer didn't do anything. Grandma Missouri was the only one not frozen to the floor. She righted herself and adjusted her dress. "Well, I guess it's a good thing he's dead. This way no harm's done." Mrs. Gunzer was wild-eyed. "No harm! No harm! Look at his tie! His tie is ruined!" Grandma shrugged. "It was an accident. I caught my heel on the carpet. Could have happened to anybody." I snagged Grandma Missouri by the elbow, gathered her belongings together, and steered her toward the door. Spiro guided us into the foyer. I hope this incident won't keep you from returning to Steva's. We always like to see pretty women come to visit." He leaned closer, his lips hovering at my ear in a conspiratorial whisper. "I'd like to speak to you in private about some business I need conducted." "What sort of business?" "I need something found, and I hear you're very good at finding. I asked around after you inquired about Kenny. Actually, I'm pretty busy right now, and I'm not a private investigator." $1,000 flat finder's fee." "Well, of course, if we kept it quiet, I don't see any harm in helping a friend." I leaned toward his ear. "What are we looking for?" "Caskets. 24 caskets." I wasn't sure how one went about losing 24 caskets, but $1,000 is $1,000. I promised to return without Grandma Mazur so we could discuss case details. When I got to my apartment, Morelli was waiting for me, slouched against the wall, hands stuffed into pockets, ankles crossed. He looked up expectantly when I stepped out of the elevator and smiled at the brown grocery bag I carried. "Let me guess, leftovers." He held the bag while I opened the door. He sidestepped into the kitchen and pulled a foil-wrapped packet of chicken out of the bag, along with a container of stuffing, a container of gravy, and a container of mashed potatoes. "Anything interesting turn up?" I gave him a plate and silverware and took a beer from the refrigerator. "Big zero. No one's seen him." "You have any clever ideas about where we go from here?" Until then, I'd forgotten about the mail in my pocketbook. I hauled it out and spread it on the kitchen counter. Morelli looked disgusted. "Shit. Isn't anything sacred to you?" "Mom's apple pie." I paged through the phone statement and was surprised to find 4 overseas calls. "Morelli, you know any of these codes?" "Top 2 are Mexico." "Can you put names to numbers?" Morelli slid the antenna up on my portable phone and dialed. "Hey, Murphy, I need you to get me names and addresses for numbers." Minutes later, Murphy called back. Morelli's face was impassive when he hung up. I'd come to know this as his cop face. "The second 2 numbers are El Salvador." Murphy couldn't get more specific. I snitched a piece of chicken from his plate and nibbled on it. Why is Kenny calling Mexico and El Salvador? Maybe he's planning a vacation. I didn't trust Morelli when he went bland like this. He opened Kenny's MasterCard bill. "Kenny's been busy. He charged almost $2,000 worth of stuff last month." "Any airline tickets?" "No airline tickets." He handed the bill over to me. "Look for yourself." I did. Mostly clothes. All local stores. I stared at the bills. "Morelli, about these phone numbers." He had his head back in the grocery bag. "Is that apple pie I see?" "You touch that pie and you're a dead man." Morelli chucked me under the chin. "I love it when you talk tough like that. I'd like to stay here and hear more, but I have to get moving." He let himself out and disappeared into the elevator. When the elevator doors clicked closed, I realized he'd walked off with Kenny's phone bill. The next morning, I dragged my body out of bed at 7. After a dismal 3-mile run to burn off the pie, I decided to head back to the scene of the crime. I identified myself to Cubby Delio, the station owner who sat behind a desk of black smudged paperwork. He shook his head. "Can't understand it. I owned this station for 22 years and never had any trouble." "How long had Moogie worked for you?" 6 years. Started working here when he was in high school." "I'm gonna miss him. He was a likable person. He was real reliable. I never had to worry about a thing." Cubby gave me Moogie's last known address. I thanked him for his time and got back to my Jeep. The only thing unusual at Moogie's was his car. He had a red BMW. I thought it looked a little pricey for a guy who worked in a gas station, but what did I know? I took down the plate number and returned to my Jeep. I was sitting there, thinking, now what, when my cellular phone rang. It was Connie, the secretary for my cousin's bond office. "I got an easy recovery for you." "How easy is easy?" "This one's a bag lady. The old babe at the train station. She lifts Sundays and then forgets her court date. All you gotta do is pick her up and get it to the judge." Of course, it turned out not to be that easy. After the bag lady talked me into giving her my tuna on Kaiser, with the pickle, and paying to secure her plastic bags in a locker, she took off while I got her a milk to replace all the vitamin D she complained she would lose out of the sun. But I waited her out, and 2 hours later she returned. I finally threatened her with flushing the locker keys if she didn't come with me. Another hour later, I left the police station with my body receipt. It was close to 4, and I had no more stones to turn in the hunt for Mancuso, so I headed home. I let myself into my apartment and almost stepped on an envelope that had been shoved under the door. It was a plain white, business-size envelope with my name printed in silver paste-on letters. I removed the single piece of white paper and read the two-sentence message, which had also been formed from paste-ons. Take a vacation. It will be good for your health. If the threat was from Kenny, that meant he was still in Trenton. Even better, it meant I'd done something to get him worried. I said howdy to Rex, dumped my pocketbook and the envelope on the kitchen counter, and accessed my phone messages, heartened by Grandma Mazur's voice. I hate these stupid machines. Always feel like a dang fool talking to nobody. I saw in the paper where there's going to be a viewing for that gas station fellow at 7 tonight, and I could use a ride. A viewing for Moogie Bues. That seemed worthwhile. I called Grandma and told her I'd pick her up. I declined my mother's dinner invitation, promised her I wouldn't wear jeans to the viewing, and disconnected. I dialed Eddie Gazzara. He picked up on the first ring. It's your nickel. I want to know what Joe Morelli's working on. Good luck. Half the time Morelli's captain doesn't know what Morelli's working on. I know, but you hear things. Heavy sigh. I'll see what I can dig up. When I got to my parents' house, Grandma Mazur was in a rush to get to the viewing. I hope they didn't smooth over Moogie's bullet holes too good. Don't get your hopes up, Grandma. I think this will be a closed coffin. Closed coffin? Well, that would be darn disappointing. Word gets out that Steve is having closed coffins, his attendance will drop like a rock. She buttoned a cardigan sweater over her dress and tucked her pocketbook under her arm. Didn't say anything in the paper about closed coffins. My mother rolled her eyes. She's your responsibility, Stephanie. Come back after I made chocolate pudding. The double-wide viewing room door at Steva's was propped open to better accommodate the crush of people. Grandma Mazur immediately began elbowing her way to the front with me in tow. Well, don't that beat all? You were right. They got the lid down. Her eyes narrowed. How are we supposed to know if Moogie's really in there? I gave her the silent stare. She said, Maybe we should peek inside and see for ourselves. No. Conversation paused as heads swiveled in our direction. I smiled apologetically and put a restraining arm around Grandma. It's not polite to peek into a closed casket, and besides, it's none of our business. It could be important to the case. It could have to do with Kenny Mancuso. You're just nosy. You just want to see bullet holes. There's that. I noticed Ranger had also come to the viewing. He'd positioned himself against a back wall, body relaxed, eyes watchful. Joe Morelli stood opposite him in a similar pose. Grandma, I need to talk to Ranger. If I leave you alone, will you promise not to get into trouble? Grandma sniffed. Well, that's plain insulting. I watched a man slide past the knot of people congregated at the door. He acknowledged Ranger with a nod. Only if you knew Ranger would you know, he replied. I looked at Ranger, and he mouthed, Sandman, to me. Sandman? The name didn't mean anything. Sandman's eyes were dark, deep-set and lined. His hair was black, oiled back from his face. I made it back to Ranger. Who's that guy? Sandman. His name is Perry Sandman. Got the name of Sandman on account if you irritate him, he'll put you in sleep for a real long time. How do you know him? He gets around, buys a little dope from the brothers. What's he doing here? Works at the garage. Moogie's garage? Yeah. I hear he was there when Moogie got shot in the knee. Someone screamed in the front of the room, and there was the sound of a heavy object being slammed down. A heavy object like a coffin lid. I felt my eyes involuntarily roll skyward. Spiro appeared in the doorway not far from me. He strode forward, cutting a swath through the crowd. I had a clear view in his wake, and the view was of Grandma Mazur. It was my sleeve. It got caught by accident on the lid, and the dang thing just opened up. It could have happened to anyone. Grandma glanced back at me and gave me a thumbs up. Ranger looked at me. Is that your granny? Yep. She was checking to make sure Moogie was here. You got a hell of a gene pool, babe. Spiro tested the lid to make sure it was securely closed. Grandma said, I couldn't help but notice while the lid was up that you did a nice job. Couldn't hardly see those holes at all except for where your mortician's putty had sunk in a little. Spiro nodded, and with a touch of a fingertip to Grandma's back, deftly turned her away from the casket. We have tea in the lobby. Perhaps you would like a cup of tea after this unfortunate experience. I guess a cup of tea wouldn't hurt. We were pretty much done here anyways. I accompanied Grandma to the lobby and made sure she was actually going to drink tea. When she settled into the chair with her cup and some cookies, I went on my own in search of Spiro. I found him loitering just outside the side door, sneaking a smoke. I knocked lightly on the glass door to get his attention. "Would you like to discuss the, now?" He nodded to me, took one last long drag, and pitched his cigarette onto the driveway. "I need these things found yesterday. Caskets are like anything else. Manufacturers have surplus. Sometimes it's possible to buy bulk and get a good price. About 6 months ago, I put in a bulk bid and got 24 caskets below cost. We're short on storage space here, so I stowed the caskets in a rental locker." Spiro took an envelope from his jacket pocket. "This is the key to the locker. The address is inside the envelope. I've also included a photograph of one of the caskets. They were all the same, very plain. Have you reported this to the police? I want to get the caskets back and generate as little publicity as possible. Maybe you should cut your losses and collect the insurance." "I can't file for insurance without a police report, and I don't want to bring the police in." The job was beyond bizarre, but the $1,000 was tempting. "I suppose I can look into it." I left his office and went back to look for Grandma. I found her in the lobby, sipping tea with Joe Morelli. When I walked in, she looked up and said, "Well, here she is. Speak of the devil." Morelli grinned. "We've been talking about you." "Oh, goody. I guess you're still in war mode." "You swiped the phone bill last night." "I forgot I had it in my hand." So why don't you tell me about the Mexican numbers?" "Nothing to tell." "I don't believe that for a second, and I don't believe you're putting all this effort into finding Kenny because you're a good family person." "You have reason for your doubts?" "I have a queasy feeling in the pit of my stomach." Morelli grinned. "You can take that to the bank. I hear you had a secretive meeting with Spiro." "Business." "Too bad we're not working together. If we were working together, I could tell you about my cousin's car." "What about his car?" "They found it late this afternoon, abandoned. No bodies in the trunk, no bloodstains, no Kenny." "Where?" "The parking lot at the mall." "Were the doors locked?" "All but the driver's door." I considered that for a moment. If I was abandoning my cousin's car, I'd make sure all the doors were locked. Morelli and I stared into each other's eyes and let the next thought go unsaid. Maybe Kenny was dead. There was no real basis in fact to draw such a conclusion, but the premonition skittered through my mind. I wanted fresh air and chocolate pudding, and I wanted to get out of my pantyhose. "Grandma, I'm ready to leave. How about you?" Grandma looked around. "It's still kind of early, but I guess I haven't got anybody left to see." She turned to Morelli. "We had chocolate pudding for dessert tonight, and there's still some left. We always make a double batch." Been a long time since I've had homemade chocolate pudding." "Is that so? Well, you're welcome to join us. We got plenty." A small, strangled sound escaped from the back of my throat, and I glared, "No, no, no," at Morelli. Morelli gave me one of those ultra-naive, "What?" looks. "Chocolate pudding sounds great. I'd love some chocolate pudding." Morelli followed us to the house, pulled up to the curb, and got out of the truck. My mother opened the storm door, and even from a distance I could see the stern set to her mouth and a stiffening of her spine. She didn't see Joe Morelli, a man in search of pudding. She didn't see Morelli the cop. My mother saw Joe Morelli, the fast-fingered, horny little 8-year-old who had taken me to his father's garage to play choo-choo when I was 6. Morelli smiled. "I hope I'm not intruding. I know you weren't expecting company." "This is the opening statement that will get you into any burg house. No housewife worth her salt will ever admit to having her house not up to company 24 hours a day." My mother gave a curt nod and grudgingly stepped aside while the three of us slid past. For fear of mayhem, my father had never been informed of the choo-choo incident. This meant he regarded Morelli with no more and no less contempt and apprehension than any of the other potential suitors my mother and grandmother dragged in off the street. We all settled in. 2 puddings later, Morelli peeled himself away from the table. We left together and lingered to talk privately at the curb. The sky was starless and moonless, and most of the houses were dark. Morelli turned my suit collar up against the chill air. His knuckles brushed my neck, and his gaze lingered on my mouth. "You have a nice family." I narrowed my eyes. If you kiss me, I'll scream, and then my father will come out and punch you in the nose. Fact was, before any of those things happened, I'd probably wet my pants. I could take your father. But you wouldn't. Morelli still had his hands on my collar. No, I wouldn't. Joe, there was a guy at the viewing named Sandeman. Do you know him? I busted him for possession about 2 years ago. He got caught in a sweep. Thought maybe I'd see if he had any ideas on Kenny. Don't get too close to Sandeman. He's a real jerk. Bad temper, bad attitude. Terrific mechanic. The upstairs window opened and my mother stuck her head out. Stephanie, what are you doing out there? What will the neighbors think? Morelli pulled his car keys out of his pocket. Nothing to worry about, Mrs. Plum. I was just leaving. Rex was running in his wheel when I got home. I kicked my shoes off en route to the kitchen and punched play on my answering machine. There was only one message. Gazzara had called to tell me no one knew much about Morelli, only that he was working on something big and that it tied in to the PcxnBU investigation. I rolled myself out of bed at 7 the next morning, feeling cranky and bedraggled. My basic problem was that I had plenty of ideas about Joe Morelli and hardly any about Kenny Mancuso. I poured out a bowl of cereal, filled my Daffy Duck mug with coffee, and picked through the contents of the envelope Spiro had given me. The storage facility was just off Route 1 in an area of strip mall-type light industrial complexes. The photo of the missing casket showed a product that was clearly at the bottom of the funeral food chain. It was little more than a plain pine box, devoid of the carvings and beveled edges usually found on Berg caskets. People spent money on funerals and weddings in the Berg. Why Spiro would buy 24 of these crates was beyond my comprehension. I filled Rex's little ceramic food dish with Cheerios and blueberries. Rex popped out of his soup can with his nose twitching with happiness and good fortune. That's the neat part about a hamster. It doesn't take too much to make a hamster happy. I grabbed my jacket and the large black leather pocketbook that held all my bounty hunter paraphernalia and headed for the stairs. R&J Storage occupied about a half-acre of land on Oatland Avenue. Sturdy chain-link fencing surrounded the self-storage facility. I pulled into the entrance and crept along, counting off numbers until I reached number 16. I inserted the key in the lock and pressed the button that triggered the hydraulic door. The door rolled up along the ceiling, and sure enough, the warehouse was empty. Not a coffin or clue in sight. Why would someone choose to steal caskets? They're big and heavy, and the resale market is limited to non-existent. Maybe some down-on-his-luck undertaker took them, like Moselle. Ever since Steva opened up his new edition, Moselle had been on a downslide. Maybe Moselle knew Spiro had caskets stashed here, and he tippy-toed in one dark night and swiped them. I decided that later on I'd go around to a bunch of viewings and see if anyone was laid out in one of Spiro's caskets. Right now I'd go talk to the manager. A woman wearing a white t-shirt sporting a blue R&J Storage logo stood behind the service counter. She gave me a perfunctory nod. I told her I was checking on some stored items for a friend of mine and that I was concerned with security. Who was this friend? Spiro Steva. She was clearly fighting back a grimace. No offense, but he's got that locker filled with coffins. I don't think you have to worry about security. Who on earth would steal a coffin? How do you know he has coffins in there? I saw them come in. He had so many they had to come in a semi and get offloaded with a forklift. Do you work here full-time? I work here all the time. My husband and I own it. I'm the R in the R&J. Roberta. You have any other big trucks coming here in the last couple of months? A few real big U-Hauls. Is there a problem? I didn't see any way I could get the information I needed without bringing Roberta into the investigation. Steve's coffins are missing. The locker's empty. How did they get in? Was the lock broken? I didn't know how they got in. The lock wasn't broken, and Spiro had been emphatic that the key had never left his possession. Of course, that could be a lie. Roberta said, "He's insured. We make everybody take insurance." He can't collect on insurance without filing a police report, and at this preliminary stage, Mr. Steva would prefer to keep things quiet. Tell you the truth, I'm not anxious for this to get around either. Don't want people thinking our lockers aren't safe. It would be helpful if you could think back to trucks in the vicinity of Spiro's locker. Trucks big enough to haul those caskets. I gave Roberta one of my cards with instructions to call should something turn up. I decided my next stop would be a call on Sandeman. I cut across town and left-turned onto Hamilton. 7 blocks later, I nosed into a parking slot to the side of Delio's Exxon. At this hour, they didn't see much action. The office door was open, but the office was empty. Beyond the office, the doors to the bays were up. The third bay had a car on a rack. Sandeman worked nearby, balancing a tire. He was wearing a faded black Harley tank top that stopped 2 inches short of lowrider grease-stained jeans. His arms and shoulders were covered with tattoos of snakes, fangs bared, forked tongues sticking out. He straightened when he saw me and wiped his hands on his jeans. "Yeah." "You're Perry Sandeman?" "You got it." "Stephanie Plum. I work for Kenny Mancuso's bondsman. I'm trying to locate Kenny." "Haven't seen him." "I understand he and Moogie were friends." "That's what I hear." "Did Kenny come around the garage a lot?" "No." "Did Moogie ever talk about Kenny?" "No." "Was I wasting my time?" "Yes." "You were here the day Moogie was shot in the knee. Do you think the shooting was accidental?" "I was in the garage. I don't know anything about it. End of quiz. I got work to do." I gave him my card and told him to get in touch if he should think of anything useful. He tore the card in half and let the pieces float to the cement floor. "You got a problem, Sandeman?" "I don't like cops. That includes pussy cops." "I'm not a cop. I'm a bond enforcement agent." "You're a fucking pussy bounty hunter. I don't talk to fucking pussy bounty hunters." "You call me pussy one more time, and I'm going to get mad." "Oh, is that supposed to worry me?" I had a canister of pepper spray in my pocketbook and was itching to give him a blast. I also had a stun gun. "Just make sure you're not withholding information, Sandeman. Your parole officer might find it annoying." He gave me a shot to the shoulder that knocked me back a foot. "Somebody yanks my parole officer's chain, and somebody might find out why they call me Sandman. Maybe you want to think about that." Not any time soon, I thought. It was still early afternoon when I left the garage. About the only thing I'd learned from Sandeman was that I thoroughly disliked him. I needed to take a look at his home sweet home and make sure Kenny wasn't sharing the rent. I called Loretta Hines at the DMV. Loretta and I went way back. We'd been Girl Scouts together and had bitched our way through the worst 2 weeks of my life at Camp Sacagawea. Loretta punched up her handy-dandy computer, and voila, I had Sandeman's address. Sandeman lived on Morton Street in an area of large stone houses that had gone to trash. An old man sat on the front stoop. He squinted at me. "Guess I know a cop when I see one." I looked down at my Doc Martens, wondering if it was the shoes. Maybe Morelli was right. I presented my card. "I'm not a cop. I'm looking for Perry Sandeman. I'm interested in finding a friend of his." "Sandeman isn't home. Only comes here when he's drunk or doped up. And then he's mean." "You know his apartment number?" 3C. "Anybody there now?" "Haven't seen anybody go in." I moved past the man into the foyer and stood for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. I rapped on 3C and waited for a reply. I rapped again. Nothing. There was a window to the back of the hall, and through the window I could see the black rusty bars of a fire escape. I opened the window and crawled out, feet first. I quickly scuttled to Sandeman's window and looked in. There was an unmade cot that served as his bed, a small Formica kitchen table and chair, a TV on a metal stand, and a dorm-sized refrigerator. There were no doors other than the front door, so I assumed Sandeman had to use the john in the hall. I bet that was a treat. Most important, there was no Kenny. Half an hour later, I was back in my apartment, deciding what to wear for an evening of funeral parlor sleuthing. I settled on boots, a long denim skirt, and a white knit shirt. I spiffed up my makeup and put a few hot rollers in my hair. When the rollers came out, I was several inches taller. I picked up my Grandma Mazur and we set out on an evening of visiting funeral homes. Grandma would critically examine the makeup of the various deceased persons, while I checked out what economy-line caskets were available. But no one had anything nearly as cheap-looking as Steve's missing caskets. By the time we were on the road to the House of Eternal Slumber, I was punchy with death. The House of Eternal Slumber was the only home left on my list. I turned right onto Stark Street, instantly plunging us into a despairing neighborhood. I parked just short of the mortuary and studied the House of Eternal Slumber. It was one of the few buildings on the street not covered with graffiti. I did a quick review of my cover story. I was here to see Fred Ducky Wilson, dead at the age of 68. If anyone asked, I would claim he was my grandfather's friend. Grandma Mazur and I quietly entered the funeral parlor and scoped the place out. It was small. Only one viewing room was being used. Grandma sucked on her dentures and surveyed the crush of people spilling out of Ducky's room. "This isn't going to float. We're the wrong color. We're going to look like hogs in the henhouse." I'd hoped for a mix of races. This end of Stark Street was pretty much a melting pot, with hard luck being the common denominator more than skin color. I had a fleeting view of Ducky's casket, and even from this distance I knew his family had spared no expense. "I've seen enough. I think it's time to go home." "Fine by me. I could use to get these shoes off." We swung through the front door, and Grandma squinted under the overhead light. "Well, that's funny. I could have swore we parked the car here." I heaved a sigh. We did park the car here. "It isn't here anymore." It sure as hell wasn't. The car was gone. I pulled my phone out of my pocketbook and called Morelli. There was no answer at his home number, so I tried his car phone. At the risk of sounding cynical, I suspected Morelli was camped out in my parking lot, waiting for me to come home so he could get briefed on Perry Sandeman. There was a crackle of static, and Morelli came on. I said, "It's Stephanie. I'm at the House of Eternal Slumber on Stark Street. My car's been stolen." There was no immediate response, but I thought I heard some muffled laughter before he said, "Have you called it in?" "I'm calling it in to you." "I'm honored." "Grandma Missouri's with me, and her feet hurt." 10-4, Kimosabe. While we waited, Grandma Missouri and I huddled close to the door of the House of Eternal Slumber, ever on the alert should my car cruise by. Morelli's truck turned at the corner and made its way up Stark Street. He set his flasher and sauntered around to us. "I had the dispatcher notify all cars as soon as I got your call, but I wouldn't count on anything. By now there's probably nothing left of that Jeep but a grease spot on some garage floor." We all piled in the truck, made a U-turn, and drove back to the burg. We made a perfunctory stop at my parents' house, only staying long enough to deposit Grandma Missouri in the lazy boy rocker. On the way out, my mother handed me the traditional bag of food. "A little something for a snack, some spice cake." Back in the truck, Morelli sniffed at the bag. "I love spice cake." "Forget it, you're not getting any." "I went out of my way to help you tonight. The least you can do is give me some spice cake." "You just want to come up to my apartment so you can find out about Perry Sandeman." "That's not the only reason." "Sandeman wasn't in a talky mood." "Learn anything at all?" "He hates cops. He hates me. I hate him. He lives in a walk-up on Morton Street, and he's a mean drunk." "How do you know about him being a mean drunk?" "Went to his home address and talked to one of his neighbors." Morelli slid a glance at me. "I hope you had the sense not to give out your name. Sandeman won't be happy to find you snooping around his crib." "I think I might have left my card." Morelli gave me a "boy, are you stupid or what" look. "So, what's with the tour of the funeral home circuit?" I told him about my job for Steva, explaining that Steva didn't want the police involved. Morelli didn't know what to make of the story, but offered his assistance. Thanks, but no thanks. Morelli stopped at a light and stared blankly. "Something wrong, Morelli?" He blew out a long breath. "Lots of things. About this case I'm working on." "The big top secret one?" "Yeah." He hesitated, clearly a cop between a rock and a hard place. "This is to be kept quiet. It's an interagency operation." "Sure." 3 months ago, a cop was killed in Philadelphia. He was wearing a Kevlar vest, but he caught a couple high-penetration rounds square in the chest. One tore into his left lung. The other hit the heart. Cop-killer bullets. Then, 2 months ago, Newark had a real effective drive-by where the weapon of choice was a law. Light anti-tank weapon. Army issue. Significantly decreased the population of the Sherman Street big dogs. The casing from the rocket was recovered and traced to Fort Braddock. Braddock ran an inventory and discovered some munitions missing. When we got Kenny into custody, we put his gun through NCRC. And what do you think? It came from Braddock? Yup. This was an excellent secret. This made life much more interesting. What'd Kenny say about the hot gun? Said he bought it on the street. Said he didn't know the vendor by name, but he'd work with us to try to make an ID. And then he disappeared. My mind was moving at warp speed, generating all sorts of wonderful possibilities. You could have bagged Kenny in the parking lot when he was doing his thing with Julia, but you wanted to follow him to see where he was hiding out. I think you aren't just looking for Kenny. I think you're looking for more guns. Keep going. I was feeling really pleased with myself now, trying hard not to smile too wide. Kenny was stationed at Braddock. He got out 4 months ago and started spending money. He bought a car, paid cash, then he rented a relatively expensive apartment and furnished it. He filled the closets with new clothes. And Moogie was doing pretty good too, considering he was living on a gas station attendant's wages. He had a megabucks car in his garage. Your conclusion? Kenny and Moogie were involved in the Braddock ammo ripoff. What was Kenny doing at Braddock? Where did he work? He was a shipping clerk. He worked in the warehouse. And the missing munitions were stored in the warehouse? Actually, they were stored in a compound adjacent to the warehouse, but Kenny had access to it. Do you know how he got this stuff out? No. CID doesn't know either. No one checks inventory unless something is needed, or, in this case, unless something turns up stolen. So, where do we go from here? Thought it might be helpful to see if Ranger can get a line on the distribution. I told Morelli I'd ask Ranger to check the streets. When we reached my building, Morelli, against my objections, insisted on coming up for spice cake. We rode the elevator in silence, exited at the second floor, and stopped short at the sight of my door slightly ajar. There were gouge marks where a tool had been inserted between jamb and door and used to pry the door open. Morelli unholstered his gun and motioned for me to step aside, his eyes locked on the door. I pulled the .38 out of my pocketbook. We both peeked cautiously inside my apartment, entering the foyer glued at the hip like Siamese twins. No one was inside. At first glance, damage seemed to consist exclusively of spray-painted slogans having to do with female organs and anatomically impossible suggestions. I heard Morelli walk to the living room and stop. Silence followed. "Joe, what are you doing?" "Watching your cat." "I don't have a cat." "What do you have?" "A hamster." "Are you sure?" A little ripple of alarm raced through my chest. Rex! I rushed from the bedroom into the living room, where Rex's glass aquarium rested on an end table beside the couch. I halted dead center in the room at the sight of a huge black cat stuffed into the hamster cage, the mesh lid held tight with duct tape. The cat sat hunkered down, slitty-eyed, and as pissed off as any cat could get. It didn't look especially hungry, and Rex was nowhere in sight. I could barely speak. "It's Mrs. Delgado's cat. She lives directly above me, and the cat lives on the fire escape." Morelli cut the duct tape, lifted the mesh lid, and the cat jumped out and bolted for the bedroom. I looked into the cage, but I didn't see any hamster remains. No fur, no little bones, no yellow fangs. Nothing. Morelli looked too. Pretty thorough job. This drew a sob. We stayed like that for a minute, squatting in front of the cage, numbly staring at pine shavings in the back of Rex's soup can. He asked, "What's a soup can for?" "He slept in the soup can." Morelli tapped on the can, and Rex rushed out. I almost fainted with relief, caught midway between laughing and crying, too choked to speak. While I was bonding with Rex, Morelli set out wedges of spice cake and poured glasses of milk. He pointed at my business card impaled on my carving knife, which was sunk into the middle of my square wood table. "I think we can hazard a pretty good guess at the identity of the villain here." Morelli finished his milk and cake and rocked back in his chair. "How spooked are you about all of this?" "Oh, on a scale of 1 to 10, I guess I'm at a 6. I slid the chain home after Morelli left. I lay awake a long time, unable to sleep. My mind wandered. I was pretty sure that Sandeman hadn't vandalized my apartment. One of the messages in my bedroom had mentioned conspiracy, and a silver letter K had been pasted below the message. Probably I should have shown Morelli and then told him about the silver letter note suggesting I take a vacation. I wasn't sure why I held back. I suspected the reason was childish, sort of like, "You won't tell me your secret and I will tell you mine. Nya, nya, nya." The next morning I called Dylan Ruddick, the building superintendent. I explained my problem, and about half an hour later Dylan showed up with assorted paraphernalia. He went to work on the door, and I tackled the walls. It took 3 coats to cover the spray paint, but by 11 my apartment was threat-free and had all new locks installed. I talked to Ranger and told him about the munitions that had disappeared from Braddock. He knew about the cop-killer bullets, but he was very interested to know Kenny was involved. He said he'd let me know what was on the street. I then placed a call to my insurance company and reported the theft of my car. I was told my policy did not cover car rental and that payment would be made in 30 days if my car didn't turn up by then. I was doing some heavy sighing when my phone rang. Even before I touched the receiver, the urge to scream told me it was my mother. "Have you gotten your car back?" "No." "Not to worry, we have it all figured out. You can use your Uncle Sandor's car." Uncle Sandor had gone into a nursing home last month at the age of 84 and had given his car to his only living sister, Grandma Mazur. Grandma Mazur had never learned to drive. My parents and the rest of the free world weren't anxious for her to start now. While I hated to look a gift horse in the mouth, I really didn't want Uncle Sandor's car. It was a 1953 powder blue Buick with shiny white top, white wall tires big enough to fit a backhoe, and gleaming chrome portholes. It was the same size and shape as a beluga whale. I had to head this thing off. "Wouldn't think of it, Mom. Nice of you to offer, but that's Grandma Mazur's car." "Grandma Mazur wants you to have it. Your father's on his way over. Drive it in health." The far-off sound of a mammoth engine arrogantly sucking gas carried upstairs. A bulbous-nosed behemoth of a car turned the corner, and I felt my heart beat in time to the pounding of pistons. I slogged down the stairs to my father. "I don't think this is a good idea. What if I scratch it?" My father put the car in park. "It won't get scratched. It's a Buick." He thumped the dash. "This baby's made to last. This is the kind of car a man can be proud to drive. This is a car with cojones." I got in next to my father and peered over the wheel, staring open-mouthed at the amount of hood. I took a firm grip on the wheel and thumped my left foot to the floor before my brain registered, "No clutch." My father smiled. "Automatic. That's what America is all about." I dropped my father off at the house and roared off. A few blocks away, my pager beeped deep in my pocketbook. I pulled over and glanced at the digital readout. Roberta, from R&J Storage. Roberta picked up after several rings. I was hoping she'd found the caskets, but no such luck. But she'd remembered a truck that had made several trips to a locker in the vicinity of number 16. It was at the end of the month. I was doing the monthly billing, and this truck went in and out a couple of times. "Can you describe it?" "It was fairly large, like a small moving van. Not an 18-wheeler, more that it could hold a couple of rooms of furniture. And it wasn't a rental. It was white with black lettering on the door, but it was too far to read from the office." I thanked her and signed off. Hard to say if the truck information was worth anything. There had to be 100 trucks in the Trenton area to fit that description. Probably it would be wise to visit Connie and see if she had any more easy pickups for me. I found an empty parking space in front of the bond office. I eased forward, rolled up on the curb, and nudged the parking meter. I decided this was close enough, cut the engine, and locked up behind myself. Inside the office, I smiled at Connie. "I'm at a temporary impasse with Kenny Mancuso. Anything new come in that looks like a fast bust?" She handed me several forms stapled together. "Eugene Petrus missed his court appearance yesterday, probably at home drunk as a skunk." I glanced at the bond agreement. "Is this his first arrest?" Connie shook her head. "Got a long history, a real asshole. Every time he gets a couple beers in him, he knocks his wife Kitty around. Sometimes she files charges, but eventually she always backs off. Scared, I guess." "Lovely. What's his bond worth?" "He's out on $2,000. Domestic violence doesn't count for much of a threat." I tucked the paperwork under my arm. "I'll be back." Kitty and Eugene Petrus lived in a narrow row house at the corner of Baker and Rose. As I walked up to the door, I made sure I had the pepper spray easily accessible in my jacket pocket, and my cuffs and stun guns stuck into my Levi's. I knocked on the door and heard scrambling going on inside. A young woman peered out at me from behind a security chain. "Yes?" "Are you Kitty Petrus?" "What do you want?" "I'm looking for your husband, Eugene. I work for his bonding agent. Eugene missed his court date yesterday, and we'd like him to reschedule." First we'd reschedule him, and then we'd lock him up in a dingy, smelly cell until his new date came around. Eugene shoved his face out, all nose and chin and squinty red eyes and a 100-proof breath. "You're shitting me, right?" I positioned myself halfway into the door and lied my little heart out. "This will only take a few minutes. We need you to stop in at the courthouse and register for a new date." "Yeah, well, you know, what I have to say to that?" He turned his back to me, dropped his pants, and bent over. "Kiss my hairy white ass." He was facing in the wrong direction to give him a snoot full of pepper spray, so I reached into my Levi's and pulled out the stun gun. I'd never used it, but it didn't seem complicated. I leaned forward, firmly pressed the gadget against Eugene's butt, and hit the go button. Eugene gave a short squeak and crumpled to the floor like a sack of flour at Kitty's feet. She gasped. "My God, what have you done?" Stun gun. According to the brochure, it leaves no lasting damage. Too bad. I was hoping you'd killed him. I don't want no part of this. Lordy, this is terrible. He'll beat the daylights out of me for this. He can't beat you if he's in jail. He'll beat me when he gets out. If you're still here. Do you have some place to go? I have a girlfriend in New Brunswick. I can stay with her for a while. By the time I finished the paperwork at the station and got my body receipt, it was after 6. Too late to stop by the office and get paid. The light was blinking on my answering machine when I got home. The message was from Ranger. Call me. I tried his home phone. No answer. I tried his car phone. Yo, it's Stephanie. What's happening? Gonna be a party. Think you should get dressed for it. You mean like heels and stockings? I mean like a 38 S&W. I suppose you want me to meet you somewhere. I'm in an alley at the corner of West Lincoln and Jackson. I gingerly took my gun out of the brown bear cookie jar and checked to make sure it was loaded. Jackson ran for about 2 miles, skirting junkyards, the old abandoned Jackson Pipe Factory, and a ragged assortment of bars and rooming houses. Few cars traveled the 2nd mile, beyond the pipe factory. I spotted Ranger's Bronco in the alley and parked the Buick directly in front of him. I cut my lights, watching him come forward from the shadows. Nice car. Something happened to the Jeep? Stolen. Word is, there's going to be a gun deal going down tonight. Military weapons with hard-to-get ammo. The guy with the goods is supposed to be white. Kenny? Maybe. Thought we should take a look. My source tells me there's going to be a yard sale at the house facing us with the broken front window. I squinted at the street. A rusted Bonneville sat up on blocks 2 houses down. The rest of the world was empty of life. All houses were dark. Ranger said, "We are not interested in busting up this business deal. We're going to stay here and be nice and quiet and try to get a look at the white guy. If it's Kenny, we'll follow him." It's pretty dark to make an identification. Ranger handed me a pair of binoculars. Night scope. Of course. We were heading into the 2nd hour of waiting when a panel van cruised down Jackson. Seconds later, the van reappeared and parked. I trained the scope on the driver. He seems to be white, but he's wearing a ski mask. I can't see him. A BMW sedan slid into place behind the van. 4 brothers got out of the BMW and walked to the van. One of the brothers shuffled between the van and the Beamer carrying a large wooden box. He popped the trunk, stored the box, returned to the van, and repeated the procedure. Suddenly, the door to the house with the car on blocks crashed open and cops bolted out, yelling instructions, guns drawn, running for the Beamer. A police car barreled down the street and swerved to a stop. The 4 brothers scattered. Shots were fired. The van revved up and jumped away from the curb. Ranger sprinted back to the Bronco. "Don't lose sight of that van. I'll be right behind you." I slammed the Buick into drive and pressed my foot to the floor. I shot out of the alley as the van roared past, and realized too late that the van was being pursued by another car. There was a lot of screeching tires and cussing on my part, and the car in pursuit bounced off the Buick with a good solid thunk. I'd hardly felt the impact, but the other car had been propelled a good 15 feet. I saw the van's taillights disappearing down the street when my door was opened and I was yanked out and onto my feet by none other than Joe Morelli. I don't believe this. I don't fucking believe this. What do you do, sit in bed at night and think about ways to fuck up my life? Don't flatter yourself, Morelli. You almost killed me. You're overreacting. I looked over at his car. Part of the rear quarter panel had been ripped away and the back bumper lay on the ground. It's not so bad. Probably you can still drive it. We both turned our attention to Big Blue. There wasn't so much as a scratch on it. Morelli looked off into space. Shit. A Buick, just like old times. When I was 18, I'd sort of run over Morelli with a similar car. Morelli stared beyond me. I suppose that's Ranger in the black Bronco? Ranger was in the alley, doubled over the steering wheel, shaking with laughter. I said, "Forget about the car, Morelli. Did you get a look at the guy in the van? Do you think it was Kenny?" "Same height as Kenny, but he seemed slimmer and it didn't feel like Kenny to me. I have to go back to the station. I want to be there when they talk to these guys." "And you're going to run the plates on the van?" "The van was probably stolen." I returned to the Buick and back down the alley to avoid the broken glass in the road. I took the first driveway to Jackson and headed for home. After several blocks, I reconsidered. I swung around and drove to the police station. It was 2 hours before Morelli came out. I got out of the car so it would be more difficult to ignore me. "Well, how'd it go?" "The stuff was from Braddock, that's about it. We got all 4 of the guys in the BMW, but no one knows anything. The deal was set up by phone. What about the van? Stolen, just like I said. Local. Nothing to implicate Kenny? Nothing. What about a description? What'd the seller's voice sound like? He was an average white guy with an average voice and no outstanding characteristics. The interrogation went in the general direction that the brothers were looking for guns, not a fucking date. I woke up feeling grumpy and not sure why. I suspected it had something to do with Morelli. I dedicated the morning to drive-bys on Kenny's friends and relatives. While I drove, I kept an eye out for my Jeep and for white trucks with black lettering. Eventually, I gave up and drove to Steva's. I parked across the street from the mortuary. The building seemed eerily still. I needed to give Spiro a no-progress report and decline his dinner invitation, but I was having a hard time motivating myself to cross the street. I sat there a while longer, and I got to thinking how Spiro, Kenny, and Moogie had all been best friends all through high school. What if this was all tied together? What if Kenny stole the guns and hid them in Spiro's caskets? Then what? I didn't know then what. By 12 it was clear that my feet weren't going to bypass my chicken heart. No problem. I go home to my parents, mooch lunch, and drag Grandma Missouri back with me. It was almost 2 o'clock when I pulled into Steve's small side lot with Grandma perched beside me on the big bench seat. Grandma gathered her purse and gloves together. Ordinarily, I don't go to afternoon viewings. I like the crowd that comes in the evening. We made our way up the stairs and through the door. Grandma stopped for a moment to study the viewing schedule. I guess I could go see Mackie. I haven't seen him in years, not since he quit working at that A&P. I left Grandma to herself and went looking for Spiro. I found him in Khan's office, sitting behind the big walnut desk. I put the locker key on his desk. You're right about the caskets. They're gone. Let's think about the key again. You only got one, right? Right. No one had access to the key. I kept the key at home in the top drawer of my dresser. What about Khan? Did he ever have access to the key? Khan doesn't know about the caskets. I did this on my own. I wasn't surprised. Okay, new subject. Kenny Mancuso. Spiro sunk deeper into Khan's chair. We used to be friends, me and Kenny and Moogie. Now he's out to get me. He was here. This brought me out of my chair. When? Did you see him? Spiro slid the middle drawer open and extracted a sheet of paper. I found this on my desk when I came in this morning. The message was cryptic. You have something that's mine. Now I have something that's yours. It was signed with a silver K. What does this mean? I don't know what it means. It means he's crazy. You're going to keep looking for the caskets, aren't you? We made a deal. Here he is, totally stressed over this bizarre note from Kenny, and in the next breath he's quizzing me about the caskets. Very suspicious. I told him, I'll keep looking, but in all honesty, I'm stumped. Then I left him in his office and headed for Mackie's viewing room. I found Grandma at the head of the casket with Mrs. Mackie. Mrs. Mackie was nicely snockered on 100-proof tea. Grandma leaned into the casket. That's a pip of a ring George is wearing. Mrs. Mackie chugged the rest of her tea. It's his lodge ring, the Lord rest his soul. George wanted to be buried with his lodge ring. Grandma bent down for a better look. Uh-oh. Grandma straightened, holding an object the size of a king-sized Tootsie Roll in her hand. Well, will you look at this? His finger came off. Mrs. Mackie fainted, crashed onto the floor. Spiro charged into the room. Grandma held a finger out for him to see. I was just taking a close look, and the next thing I knew, here was the finger. Spiro snatched at it. This isn't a real finger. This is wax. Sometimes accidents happen during the preparation process. Creepy thoughts skittered into my mind. Nah, I told myself, Kenny Mancuso wouldn't do something like that. That would be too gross even for Mancuso. Spiro moved to the intercom just outside the door. I followed him out into the hall and waited while he instructed Louis Moon to call an ambulance and then to bring some putty to room number 4. I said, about that finger, Spiro, that got anything to do with Kenny? If you were doing your job, Kenny'd be locked up by now. How hard can it be? The guy's freaking nuts, leaving me notes, hacking up stiffs. Have you called the police? What, are you serious? I can't call the police. They'll go right to Khan. Khan finds out about any of this, he'll go apeshit. Spiro's gaze settled on a spot over my left shoulder. I turned to see what had caught his attention and was unnerved to see Louis Moon standing just inches from me. He was easy to identify because his name was written in red thread just over the breast pocket of his white jumpsuit. His skin was very pale, and his eyes were flat and faded blue. Spiro grabbed the putty from him. "We have a fainter in here. How about if you direct the paramedics to the back door and then send them up here?" Moon left without saying a word, very mellow. I waited until he was gone. "When did you find out about the finger?" "I always do a walkthrough before viewings. I noticed old George was short a finger and gave him a patch-up job. I didn't count on Granny Disaster showing up." "Who was in and out?" "Clara does hair for us. She got here around 9:30 to work on Mrs. Grasso. She left about an hour later." "So what is it that you have and Kenny wants?" Spiro grabbed his crotch and gave a hoist. "He was small. You know what I mean?" I felt my upper lip curl back. "Yeah, well, if you come up with anything else, let me know." I went back to the room and collected Grandma Mazur. Mrs. Mackey was on her feet, looking okay. In the parking lot, we found someone had been nice enough to stick a screwdriver in my white wall. I had to call my father to bring Grandma Mazur home. Since I had time on my hands, I decided I should check out Clara's beauty parlor while my tire was being repaired. I needed some information from Clara, and while I was at it, I figured I'd get a manicure. I dropped my jacket and pocketbook over the back of the chair, sat down at the little manicure stand, and plunged my fingers into the soaking bowl. Through the rumor mill, Clara had already heard I was after Kenny. I asked if she had seen him recently. She shook her head. "Not in a long time." "I heard somebody saw him sneaking into Steve's this morning." Clara stopped filing and her head came up. "Holy mother, I was at Steve's this morning." "You see or hear anything?" "No, it must have been after I left. I guess it doesn't surprise me. Kenny and Spiro were real good friends." Betty Kutchta leaned forward from the dryer hood. "Kenny was never all there, you know. He was in my Gale's class in the 2nd grade. You ever notice his pinky finger? When Kenny was 10, he chopped off the end of his pinky finger with his father's axe. Wanted to see if it would hurt." 2 dryers down, Mrs. Rizzoli nodded. "Adele Bagion told me about it. She was watching out a back window, wondering what Kenny was going to do with the axe. Said she saw him put his hand on the wood stump next to the garage and chop his finger off. Said he never cried. Said he just stood there looking at it, smiling." It was close to 5 when I left Clara's. I drove straight home with my mood darkening by the minute. I had my pepper spray in my hand when I unlocked my front door. When everything seemed in order, I relaxed a little. The red light was blinking on my answering machine. It was my friend, Mary Lou. "So, what's the deal here? You shacked up with Kevin Costner or something? Don't have time to call?" I shrugged out of my jacket and dialed her number. "Look, Mary Lou, I've been busy working with Joe Morelli." "Ooh, not that way. You sound depressed, Steph. You should get a manicure." "I got a manicure and it didn't help." "Then there's only one thing left, Steph." "Shopping?" "Fucking A. I'll meet you at Quaker Bridge at 7, Steph. Macy's shoes." Mary Lou was already deep into shoes when I showed up. She held up a pair of purple suede platform pumps. "Look at these shoes. These shoes were made for you." "I don't have the money. I'm in between paychecks." "You should at least try 'em on, Steph." She snagged the salesman. "We want these shoes in a size 7.5. I took the shoes from the salesman, and Mary Lou watched as I slid them on. "Are they wonderful or what?" I walked over to the mirror at the end of the shoe department and admired the shoes. I turned to look at them from the back and slammed into Kenny Mancuso. He had my arms in an iron grip. "Surprised to see me?" I was speechless. "You're a real pain in the ass. You think I didn't see you sneaking around in the bushes at Julia's house? You think I don't know about you telling her I fucked Denise Bartolowski?" He gave me a shake that made my teeth clack together. "And now you got this cozy deal going on with Spiro, don't you? 2 of you think you're both so smart." He flicked his hand and a knife appeared. "I keep sending you messages, but you aren't listening. Maybe I should cut off your ear. Would that get your attention?" My pocketbook, with my bounty hunter paraphernalia, was on the seat beside Mary Lou, so I did what any intelligent, unarmed woman would do. I screamed at the top of my lungs, startling Kenny enough to screw up his aim so that I lost some hair, but kept my ear. He shoved me into a shoe display, gave a backward skip, and took off. I scrambled to my feet and charged after him, blasting through handbags and junior wear, operating on a surplus of adrenaline and a shortage of common sense. I was swearing at Kenny and bitching about being in pursuit in goddamn platform heels when I slammed into an old lady at the cosmetics counter and almost knocked her on her ass. I looked for Kenny, but he was long gone. In all honesty, I wasn't sure what I would have done if I caught him. He had a knife, and all I had were sexy shoes. Mary Lou helped me up. So, what do you think? You gonna get these shoes or what? By the time I got home, I wasn't so sure I'd done the right thing with the shoes. True, they were gorgeous shoes, but they were purple. I dumped my pocketbook and the new shoes on the kitchen counter and jumped back with a yelp when the phone rang. I picked up. Hello? How about now? Are you scared now? Have I got you thinking? My heart missed a beat. Kenny? Did you get my message? What message are you talking about? I left a message for you in your jacket pocket. It's for you and your new buddy, Spiro. Where are you? The disconnect clicked in my ear. Shit. I plunged my hand into my jacket pocket and started pulling stuff out. Used Kleenex, a lipstick, a quarter, a Snickers wrapper, a dead finger. Yow! I dropped everything on the floor and ran out of the room. Shit! Damn! Shit! I washed my hands with a lot of soap and hot water and crept back to the kitchen. The finger was lying in the middle of the floor. It looked very embalmed. I snatched at the phone, staying as far away from the finger as was humanly possible, and dialed Morelli. Get over here. Something wrong? Just get over here! 10 minutes later, the elevator doors opened and Morelli stepped out. I told him all the details, including the silver-lettered note I'd received, and about the silver K on my bedroom wall, and about the screwdriver, and about how it would seem they'd come from Kenny. He was quiet when I finished. After several seconds, he asked me if I bought the shoes. Yeah. Let's see. I showed him the shoes. Very sexy. I think I'm getting excited. I quickly put the shoes back in the box. You have any idea what Kenny meant when he said Spiro had something of his? No, but you should encourage Spiro. To tell you the truth, Kenny's trail has been dead cold. Having him pissed off at you is the best news I've had all week, and all I have to do now is follow you around and wait for him to make another move. Oh, good. I love being bait for a homicidal mutilator. When Morelli left, I locked the door and checked on the windows. I looked under the bed and in all the closets. When I was confident my apartment was secure, I went to bed and slept like a rock, with all the lights blazing. The phone rang at 7. I squinted at the clock and then at the phone. There is no such thing as a good call at 7 a.m. I answered the phone asking what's wrong. Morelli's voice came back at me. Nothing's wrong, not yet anyway. Your curtains are closed. I want to make sure you're okay. My curtains are closed because I'm still in bed. How do you know my curtains are closed? I'm in your parking lot. Minutes later, I powered up the Buick and rumbled out of the lot. I could see Morelli keeping a respectable distance behind me. I gave Spiro the rundown on Kenny in the shoe department and how I found the finger when I got home. He pressed his lips together, but his lips weren't ever able to entirely close over his overbite. You see, this is the difference between Kenny and me. Everything's a game to Kenny. When we were kids, I'd step on a bug and squash it dead, and Kenny'd stick it with a pin to see how long it'd take the bug to die. If it was me, I'd have gotten you in a dark, empty parking lot, and I'd have shoved the finger up your butt. I felt my head go light. Spiro grinned. Just talking, theoretically, of course. I would never do that to you on account of you're such a fox. Not unless you wanted me to. I have to go now. I practically ran back to the Buick. I slid behind the wheel, locked the door, and called Morelli. Spiro didn't tell me anything, at least not anything I wanted to hear. I picked up something interesting on the radio while I was waiting for you. There was a fire on Low Street last night. It was in one of the buildings belonging to the old pipe factory. Clearly arson. The pipe factory's been boarded up for years, but it seems someone was using the building to store caskets. Are you telling me somebody torched my caskets? Did Spiro put any contingencies on casket condition, or do you get paid dead or alive? I'll meet you over there. A heap of charred, waterlogged trash sat in the middle of the pipe factory bay. Only at the far perimeter of the sodden mess were remains that could be recognized as a casket, an outer wood box and an inner wood box. Nothing fancy, both blackened from fire. I reached out to touch a corner, and the casket and packaging collapsed in on itself, settling with a sigh. I selected a burnt clasp, wrapped it in Kleenex, and slid it into my jacket pocket. It felt heavy. not in terms of ounces and pounds, but in measurements of dread. I told Morelli that I wasn't ready to go knocking on Spiro's door. When in dread, my rule was always to procrastinate. Maybe I'll go home for lunch, Morelli, and then I could bring Grandma Mazur back to Steve's with me. There'll be someone new in George Mayer's room. Very thoughtful of you. Am I invited for lunch? No, you already had pudding and you made a good impression. If I bring you home for a meal, they'll never let up. Morelli ignored me, of course. He was waiting in front of my parents' house when I arrived. While everyone was ladling out soup and scarfing up cold cuts, I pulled the paper with the casket photo out of my pocketbook. The hardware looked similar to what I'd seen at the fire site. Grandma Mazur leaned over. What's that? Looks like a picture of a casket. You aren't thinking of buying that for me, are you? I don't want one of the military caskets. Morelli's head came up. Military? Only place they got caskets this ugly is the military. I saw on TV about how they got all these caskets left over from Desert Storm. They got acres of caskets to get rid of, so the Army's been auctioning them off. They're what you call it, surplus. Morelli and I looked at each other. Duh. He turned to my mother. I need to make a phone call. Is it okay if I use your phone? It seemed pretty far-fetched to think Kenny had smuggled the guns and ammo off the base in caskets. Still, it would explain Spiro's casket anxiety. Eventually, Morelli returned to the table, looking like the cat that swallowed the canary. Good news. I hustled the soup bowls and plates into the kitchen. Morelli followed me. Gotta go, Mom. Work to do. Mom was standing at the sink. Work. Ha! Some work. Lunch was wonderful, Mrs. Plum. The soup was terrific. You shall come again. We're having pot roast tonight. When we got outside, I looked Morelli square in the eye. You are not coming to dinner. Sure stuff. What about the phone call? Braddock had a shitload of surplus caskets. They conducted a sale 6 months ago. That was 2 months before Kenny was discharged. Steve's mortuary bought 24. The caskets were stored in the same general area as the munitions. So, you think it's possible Kenny used the caskets to smuggle the guns off the base? Then Spiro, Kenny, and probably Moogie maybe stole all this stuff from Braddock and stored it at R&J. All of a sudden, the stuff is missing. Someone pulled a double cross, and we know it wasn't Spiro because Spiro hired me to find the caskets. Doesn't seem like it was Kenny either. When he said Spiro had something that belonged to him, my guess is he was talking about stolen guns. So, who does that leave? Moogie? Dead men don't set up late-night sales meetings. Are you still following me? Yeah. Then watch out for my tires when I go into Steve's. I found Spiro in the lobby doing his best impersonation of God directing traffic. I took the blackened clasp out of my pocket and explained to Spiro about the fire. He grabbed the clasp. And you saw this? What else got burned? Was there anything else? I was thinking, like a few government guns, Spiro, but I just shook my head, and Spiro wheeled off to his office. I followed him, and he snarled at me from behind his desk. Now what? My money? Christ, I have more things to think about than your chicken shit money. Like what? Like crazy Kenny Mancuso setting fire to my goddamn caskets. How do you know it was Kenny? Who else could it be? He's Looney Tunes and he's threatening me. You should tell the cops. Yeah, right. That's all I need. Like I haven't got enough problems. I should have the cops looking up my butt. Louis Moon rushed into the room. Excuse me, I've got to talk to Spiro. Talk. It's about Mr. Lucy. There's been an accident. Spiro's eyes bore like drill bits into Louis's forehead, but Louis kept talking. I had Mr. Lucy on the table, and I was going to get him dressed when I noticed he was missing his, private part. I don't know how this could happen. The phone rang and Spiro snatched at it. Steva! His lips narrowed and I knew it was Kenny. You're nuts! Too much nose candy! Too many of those little tattoos! Kenny did some talking and Spiro cut in. Shut up! You don't know who the fuck you're talking about, and you don't know what the fuck you're doing when you mess with me. I'll see you around here, and I'll kill you. And if I don't kill you, I'll have Cookie or kill you. Spiro slammed the phone down. Fucking jerk. I put palms flat on his desk and leaned forward. I am not a Cookie, and I'm not a hired gun. And if I was in the protection business, I would not protect your slimy body. You are a mold spore, a boil, a dog turd. Let me guess. You're on the rag, right? Good thing I didn't have my gun with me, because I might have shot him. But he just smirked. There are a lot of people who wouldn't pay you anything for finding burned up stuff. But because I'm such a good guy, I'm gonna write you a check. We could consider it like a retainer. I took the check and left. I stopped to get gas, and Morelli pulled in behind me. While the attendant filled the tank, I walked over to Morelli. This is getting strange. I think Kenny's gone over the edge. Now what? I told him about Mr. Lucy and his mishap and about the phone call. Morelli, you think Kenny could be right about Spiro? You think Spiro could have emptied the caskets and hired me to cover his ass? I don't know. It doesn't feel right. My gut instinct is that this started off with Kenny, Moogie, and Spiro. And somehow a fourth player came in and screwed everything up. I think someone snatched the stuff out from under Kenny, Moogie, and Spiro and started them fighting among themselves. Someone like Louis Moon? Yeah, maybe. And it would have to be someone who had access to the locker key. Like Louis Moon. Probably all three of them had keys. Now that the caskets have surfaced, I have some cause to harass Spiro on a police investigation. I think I'll go lean on him. And I want to talk to Louis Moon. I watched Morelli drive away, and then I headed to the phone book for Spiro's address. It was heavy twilight by the time I got to Century Court's apartments. Spiro had an end unit on the ground floor. His windows were dark and his car wasn't in the lot. With Con in the hospital, Spiro was forced to keep long hours. Curtains were drawn on the windows in the front of Spiro's apartment and in the back. I tested the sliding patio door and the two windows. All locked. Suddenly, one of his windows broke, and I decided I'd better go in and make sure this broken glass didn't do any damage. Inside, I flipped the dining room light on, turning the dimmer until the light was low. I started in the kitchen, methodically going through the cabinets. I made my way through the dining room and living room without discovering anything worthwhile. No guns, no keys, no threatening notes. I went through the medicine chest and glanced at the wastebasket. Nothing. His bedroom furniture was Danish modern. The bedspread was black satin. The ceiling over the bed had been covered with paste-on mirror tiles. Porn magazines were stacked on a chair beside the bed. A used condom was stuck to one of the covers. Soon as I got home, I was going to take a shower in boiling water. I found it hard to believe there were no guns in the apartment. Spiro seemed like the kind of person to take trophies. The closet was filled with Undertaker suits and shirts and shoes. 6 pairs of black shoes lined up on the floor, and 6 shoe boxes. I opened a shoebox. Bingo, a gun. A Colt 45. I opened the other 5 boxes and ended up with a tally of 3 handguns and 3 shoeboxes filled with ammo. I copied the serial numbers off the guns and took down the information on the boxes of ammo. I made sure everything was as I'd found it, shut off all the lights, and exited through the patio door. It would be obvious to Spiro that someone had broken into its apartment, but chances were good he'd blame it on Kenny. By the time I pulled into my lot, the sky had blackened under the cloud cover and a light rain had begun to fall. I rode the elevator and made my way down the hall. A sticky note from Dylan, the super, was taped to my door. "Got a package for you," the note said, adding that he'd be home at 5. I entered my apartment, gave Rex some raisins and a corn chip, and called Morelli. "How'd it go with Spiro and Louis Moon?" "I don't think Louis Moon is involved. He doesn't have what it takes." "Intelligence?" "Contacts. Whoever has the guns is selling them off. I did some checking. Moon doesn't move in the right circles. Moon wouldn't even know how to go about finding the right circles." "What about Spiro?" "Wasn't ready to give me a confession. So, are you showered and dressed for dinner?" "Dinner? Pot roast at 6. You aren't serious." "I'll pick you up at 5:45. "No, I'll drive myself." I took a long, hot shower. Then I flopped on the bed and contemplated my future. It was a short contemplation. When I woke up, it was 5:45, and someone was pounding on my door. Morelli stepped into the foyer, his mouth curved at the edges. "Scary hair." "I sort of slept on it." "No wonder you have no sex life. It'd take a lot out of a man to wake up to hair like that." He was watching television when I came out of my bedroom 10 minutes later. "Move it, Morelli. There's going to be hell to pay if we're late." I rushed down the hall and took the stairs. I got to the ground floor and remembered the package Dylan was holding. I scrambled down the stairs to the cellar and pounded on Dylan's door. Dylan peered out. I said, "I'm late and I need my package." He handed me an overnight mail envelope and I ran back up the stairs. I grabbed Morelli by the hand, dragging him across the lot to his truck. 3 minutes, one way or the other, can make or break a pot roast. My mother and Grandma Mazur were at the door when we parked. I still had the package in my hand. I set it on the hall table and took my jacket off. Grandma Mazur picked the envelope up and studied it. Overnight mail. Must be something important. Return address says R. Klein from 5th Avenue in New York. Too bad it isn't for me. I wouldn't mind getting some overnight mail. I hadn't thought much about the package until now. I didn't know anyone named R. Klein, and I hadn't ordered anything from New York. I took the envelope from Grandma and peeled the flap back. There was a little cardboard box inside. It was taped closed. I ripped the tape away, opened the box, and sucked in my breath. There was a penis inside the box. The penis was neatly sliced off at the root, perfectly embalmed, and secured to a square of styrofoam with a hat pin. Everyone stared at the penis with the sort of dumbfounded horror usually reserved for car crashes and burn victims. Grandma Mazur's eyes showed a glint of wistfulness. Been a long time since I've seen one of those. My mother started screaming, hands in air, eyes bugging out of her head. Get it out of my house. What is the world coming to? What kind of person mails this penis? Grandma Mazur looked at the envelope. Says Klein on the return address. I always thought that was a Jewish name, but this doesn't look to me like a Jewish penis. Everyone turned their attention to Grandma Mazur. Not that I know much about it, it's just that I might have seen one of them Jewish ones in National Geographic. Morelli and I both knew the name to the attached penis. Joseph Lucy. He took the box from me and replaced the lid. I'm gonna take a rain check on dinner. I'm afraid this is a police matter. He snagged my pocketbook off the hall table and dragged me behind him. Morelli yanked the door to the truck open and tossed the overnight envelope onto the seat. God damn him. He slammed the truck into gear. He thinks this is fucking funny. Were you serious about this being a police matter? The post office frowns on the mailing of human body parts for sport purposes. Besides, I didn't think I could manage 2 hours at the dinner table with everyone focused on Joe Lucy's joystick sitting in the refrigerator next to the applesauce. You think we should tell Spiro? I think you should tell Spiro. Let him think the two of you are in this together. Maybe you can learn something. Morelli eased the truck into the Burger King drive-thru and got a couple of bags of food. As we headed to the police station, I decided to give Morelli the paper with the guns and the ammo information from Spiro's apartment. I found some hardware in Spiro's bedroom. You might want to check to see if it came from Braddock. Morelli stopped for a light and turned his face to me. His expression was unreadable in the dark. You broke into Spiro's apartment. Was this by way of an accidentally unlocked door? It was by way of a window that managed to get broken by a pocketbook. Shit, Stephanie, that's breaking and entering. People get arrested for that kind of stuff. The light changed. Morelli moved forward, and we rode in silence for the rest of the trip. He swung into the lot, parked, and cut his lights. He took the envelope with the penis, my list, and he took a bag of food. I'll do this as fast as I can. I watched him jog to the side door. I scarfed down my cheeseburger and fries and worked at the milkshake for the next 10 minutes. I finished the milkshake and crammed all the wrappers back in the bag. Now what? It was almost 7, visiting hours for Spiro. The perfect time to tell him about Lucy's dick. The glint of keys dangling from the ignition caught my eye. I dug around in my pocketbook and came up with a black magic marker. I wrote a note on the side of the food bag, backed the truck up a few feet, deposited the bag in the empty space, jumped back in the truck, and took off. Lights were blazing from Steva's, and a crowd of people milled about on the porch. I found Spiro out front. I got news for you. Yeah, well, I've got news for you, too. He jerked his head in the direction of the office. In here. He hot-footed it across the lobby and waited until we were both in his office. You're not going to believe this. You know what that asshole Kenny did now? He broke into my apartment. My eyes rounded in surprise. No! Did you report this to the police? What's between me and Kenny is private. No police. You might have to change the game plan. You remember that little incident yesterday concerning Mr. Lucy's penis? Yeah. Kenny mailed it to me. It came express mail. No shit. Where is it now? The police have it. Morelli was there when I opened the package. Fuck. He kicked his wastebasket across the room. Fuck, 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 fuck. Spiro, have you heard from Kenny since he broke into your apartment? No, but I will. I wanted to talk to you about security. You're an expert in this kind of stuff, right? I wasn't an expert at anything. That's right. So, what should I do about Kenny? I was thinking about a bodyguard. Just for at night. Someone to close up with me here and make sure I got into my apartment okay. I am not interested in guarding your body. He took a pack of 20s from his top desk drawer and counted them out. $100 a night. All you have to do is get me into my apartment safe and sound. I'll take it from there. Suddenly, I saw the value of guarding Spiro. I'd be right there on the spot if Kenny actually did show up. I'd be in a position to wheedle information. And I could legally search through Spiro's house every night. It could be worse. I could have sold out for 50. When do I start? Tonight. I close up at 10. Get here 5 or 10 minutes ahead. Why me? Why don't you get some big tough guy? Spiro put the money back in the drawer. I'd look like a fag. This way people think you're after my ass. Better for my image. Wonderful. I left his office and caught sight of Morelli slouched against the wall next to the front door, hands shoved in pants pockets, clearly pissed off. I plastered a phony smile on my face and breezed across the lobby to him, whisking out the door before Spiro had a chance to see us together. I see you got my message. I had to flag down a blue and white to get a ride over here. I don't like you running around on your own. I want you in eyesight until we nail Mancuso. I'm touched you're worried about my safety. Safety hasn't got much to do with it, Skippy. You have an uncanny knack for running into people you're looking for, and you're completely inept at taking them down. I settled onto the seat with a sigh. When you're right, you're right. And Morelli was right. We were silent for the ride back to my apartment. Morelli parked next to the Buick and cut the engine. He reached over and toyed with the collar on my jacket. Do you have any plans for tonight? I told him about the bodyguard deal. Morelli just stared at me. How do you do it? How do you walk into this stuff? If you knew what you were doing, you'd be a real threat. Guess I lead a charmed life. I pushed the truck door open and lurched out into the parking lot. Morelli followed behind me. Inside my apartment, Morelli went straight to the TV and buzzed in ESPN. The Rangers' blue jerseys blinked onto the screen. I grabbed a bag of blue corn chips from the cupboard and snagged a couple of beers from the refrigerator. I slouched next to Morelli on the couch, setting the corn chips between us. Ma and Pa on a Saturday night. Halfway through the first period, the phone rang. It was Kenny. How's it going? You and Joe doing it doggy style? I hear he likes that. You really are something, doing both Spiro and Joe Boy. Thought I'd call to see if you enjoyed your surprise package. It was a real kick. What's a point? No point. Just having fun. I was watching when you opened it and all. Nice touch bringing the old lady into it. I like old ladies. You'll have to ask Joe about the things I do to old ladies. Better yet, why don't I show you firsthand? You're sick, Mancuso. You need help. It's your granny who's gonna need help. Maybe you too. Wouldn't want you to feel left out. I could have a good time with you and Granny half-wit. It's always best when you have someone watching, waiting their turn. Maybe I could even get you to tell me about Spiro and how he steals from his friends. How do you know it wasn't Moogie who stole from his friends? Moogie didn't know enough to steal from his friends. The disconnect clicked in my ear. Morelli was standing beside me in the kitchen. His eyes were still and hard. I said, that was your cousin. He was calling to see if I enjoyed my surprise package, and then he suggested he might have some fun with me and Grandma Mazur. I thought I was doing a pretty good imitation of the tough-as-nails bounty hunter, but the truth is I was shaking inside. I called my parents' house to make sure Grandma Mazur was safe at home. Yes, she was watching television, my mother said. I assured her I'd washed my hands and begged off on coming back for dessert. I retrieved my .38 from the cookie jar, made sure it was loaded, and slipped it into my pocketbook. Morelli pulled the power on the Rangers. Kenny's feeling desperate because his gun deal got screwed up. He's looking for a scapegoat, looking for someone to punish. I think he had a buyer who paid him some front money. He's in a sweat because he can't meet his contract and the front money's been spent. And he thinks Spiro has the stuff. These two would eat their young if you gave them a chance. I had my jacket in my hand when the phone rang again. It was Louis Moon. He was here. Kenny Mancuso. He came back and he cut Spiro. Where's Spiro now? He's at St. Francis. I took him there, and then I came back to see to things, close up and all. 15 minutes later, we were at St. Francis. Spiro was sitting up on a hospital bed in the ER when we found him. His right arm was heavily bandaged from hand to forearm. Kenny had tried to cut Spiro's hand off, but the blade glanced off Spiro's Liberace-style gold ID bracelet. Spiro's white shirt was blood-splattered, open at the neck. A blood-soaked necktie and kitchen towel had been tossed onto the floor beside the bed. Spiro came out of his stupor when he saw me. You were supposed to protect me. Where the hell were you when I needed you? I don't go on duty until 10 to 10, remember? Spiro's eyes swiveled to Morelli. He's nuts. Your cousin is fucking nuts. He tried to chop my goddamn hand off. I want some police protection. I can have a blue and white drive you home tonight. After that, you're on your own. Spiro made a derisive sound and glared at me. I smiled nicely and rocked back on my heels. See you tomorrow? Yeah, tomorrow. The wind had slacked off, and it was drizzling when we came out of the hospital. Morelli stared through the rain-streaked windshield. You have any idea when Spiro opens in the morning? He usually gets to work by 9. I'm going with you. Morelli knocked on my door at 6:30, and I was way ahead of him. I'd already showered, dressed, and made sandwiches. I'd cleaned Rex's cage and had Mr. Coffee cooking. Morelli took a cup to go. This is the plan. You follow Spiro, and I follow you. I got a black Explorer now. I didn't think that sounded like much of a plan, but I didn't have anything better, so I didn't complain. It was Sunday morning. No traffic. I wasn't sure if Spiro kept the same schedule on Sundays. I suspected weekend hours depended on bodies received. Spiro didn't seem like the sort to go to church. I crossed myself. I couldn't remember the last time I attended Mass. What was that all about? What's with the sign of the cross? It's Sunday, and I'm not in church. Again. Morelli put his hand on the top of my head. It felt steady and reassuring, and heat seeped into my scalp. God loves you anyway. His hand slid to the back of my head. He pulled me to him and kissed me on the forehead. He gave me a hug, and then he was suddenly gone, striding across the lot, disappearing into the shadows. I stuffed myself into the Buick, feeling warm and fuzzy, wondering if something was going on with Morelli and me. I followed Spiro from Century Court to the funeral home. He parked in the drive-thru and entered through the side. The door stayed open while he punched in the security code. The door closed and a light flicked on in Spiro's office. 10 minutes later, Louis Moon showed up. I poured coffee out of my thermos and ate half a sandwich. No one else went in or out. At 9:30, Louis Moon left in the hearse. He returned an hour later, and someone was rolled into the back of the house. I guess this was why Louis and Spiro had come in on a Sunday morning. At 11, I used my cellular phone to call my mother and make sure Grandma Missouri was okay. She's out. I leave the house for 10 minutes, and what happens? Your father let your grandmother go off with Betty Greenberg. How long has Grandma Missouri been gone? Almost 2 hours. They were supposed to be going to the bakery. There was the sound of a door slamming and a lot of shouting in the background. It's your grandmother, and she's got her hand all wrapped up. Let me talk to her. Grandma Missouri came on the phone. Her voice was trembling with anger and indignation. You won't believe this. The most terrible thing just happened. Betty and me were coming out of the bakery with a box full of fresh-made Italian cookies when none other than Kenny Mancuso himself walked out from behind the car just as brazen as he could. Well, looky here, he says. It's Grandma Missouri. Yeah, and I know who you are, too, I says to him. You're that no-good Kenny Mancuso. That's right, he says, and I'm gonna be your worst nightmare. There was a pause, and I could hear her breathing, collecting herself. I didn't want to push her, but I needed to know. Mom said your hand was bandaged? Kenny stuck me. He took hold of my hand, and he stuck an ice pick into it. Then he took off, like the yellow-bellied dog that he is. Said he'd be coming back. I took a deep breath. So, how are you now? Are you okay? Sure, I'm okay. They fixed me up good at the hospital, gave me some of that Tylenol with codeine. You take some of that, you could get run over by a truck and never feel a thing. And then, on account of I was in a state, they gave me some relaxer pills. Grandma, maybe it'd be best if you stay in the house for a while. That's what I think, too. I'm plain tired. I could use a hot cup of tea. I got out of the Buick and stood on the sidewalk, looking for Morelli. I waved my arms over my head in a "here I am" signal. The cell phone chirped inside the Buick. I told Morelli about Grandma Mazur and waited while the silence stretched taut between us. Finally there was an oath and a disgusted sigh. It had to be hard for him. Mancuso was family. I'm sorry, Steph. Is there anything I can do? You can help me catch Mancuso. We'll catch him. What was left unsaid was the mutual fear that we wouldn't catch him soon enough. You okay to follow the game plan? Until 6. I'm going home for dinner tonight. I want to see Grandma Mazur. There was no further activity until 1 o'clock, when the funeral home opened for afternoon viewings. Cars were constantly coming and going in the parking lot, and I realized how easily Kenny could get lost in the traffic. At 5 o'clock I packed it in, not able to shake the visions of Grandma Mazur getting stuck with an ice pick. I drove back to my apartment, threw some clothes in a laundry basket, fetched Rex, and locked the door behind me. The only way I knew to protect Grandma Mazur was to move back home temporarily. When she saw me, my mother made a comment about Stella Lombardi's daughter moving in for a few days and still living with them 3 years later. By the time I sat down to dinner, I felt a scream starting somewhere deep inside. I developed a twitch in my left eye, and my mother was smiling. Isn't this nice? Everyone's sitting down to dinner together. Too bad Valerie isn't here. My sister, Valerie, had been married to the same man for 100 years and had 2 children. Valerie was the normal daughter. Grandma Mazur was directly across from me with her eyes focused inward. As my father would put it, her lights were on, but there was no one home. She was sound asleep by 7 o'clock, snoring like a drunken lumberjack. My mother came into the hall as I slipped into my jacket and grabbed my pocketbook. Where are you going? To Steve's. He's hired me to help him close. Now, that's a job. You could do a lot worse than to work for Steve. I closed the front door behind me and took a deep, cleansing breath. The air felt cool on my face. At Steve's, I parked in the lot, and had just settled in when Morelli rang my car phone. How's Grandma Mazur? This caught me by surprise. I'd expected Morelli to keep watching Spiro, but he'd followed me instead, and I hadn't spotted him. She's sleeping. I hope this move to your parents' house is temporary. I had plans for those purple shoes. At 10 of 10, I pulled into the mortuary driveway. Spiro was looking nervous, saying goodbyes. When the last of the mourners cleared the front porch, I walked Spiro through the public areas on the top 2 floors of the house, securing windows and doors. Only 2 viewing rooms were, quote-unquote, occupied. We paced through the kitchen, into the back hall. Spiro opened the door to the cellar. We need to check the cellar door. Are there bodies down there? Sorry, we're fresh out of bodies. So, what's down there? The furnace, for Christ's sake. I pulled out my gun. I'll be right behind you. The basement was basically one large room, and pretty much what you'd expect from a basement, with the possible exception of caskets stacked in one of the corners. I checked the outside door to make sure the bolt was thrown. Nobody here. I followed Spiro to the back door and held the door open, watching him activate the alarm and hit the light switch. The lights inside dimmed. The exterior lights remained on. Spiro shut the door and pulled car keys from his coat pocket. We'll take my car. You ride shotgun. How about you take your car, I take my car? No way. I pay $100. I want my gunny sitting next to me. You can take the car home with you and pick me up in the morning. He lit up when we were safely inside, rolled the engine over, and shifted to drive. We stopped for a light at Hamilton and Gross. Spiro's head didn't move, but his eyes cut to Delio's Exxon. The bays were dark and closed. Several cars and a truck had been parked in front of the end bay, drop-offs to be serviced first thing in the morning. The light changed, and we motored through the intersection. We were halfway down the block when my brain kicked in. Oh my God, go back to the gas station. Spiro braked and pulled to the side. You didn't see Kenny, did you? No, I saw a truck, a big white truck with black lettering on the side. You're gonna have to do better than that. When I talked to the woman who managed the storage lockers, she said she remembered seeing a white truck with black lettering make several passes in the area of your locker. It was too vague to mean anything at the time. Spiro waited for a break in traffic and wheeled a U-turn. The truck belonged to Mako Furniture, a small, local, family-owned business. This mean anything to you? Spiro shook his head. No. Don't know anybody at Mako Furniture. It's the right size for caskets. There must be 50 trucks in Trenton that fit this description. Yes, but this one is at the garage where Moogie worked, and Moogie knew about the caskets. He went down to Braddock and drove them back for you. Dumb chick feeds information to slimy guy. Come on, slimy guy, I thought. Get careless. Give me some information in return. So, you think Moogie was tight with someone from Mako Furniture, and they decided to steal my caskets? It's possible, or maybe while the truck was being serviced, Moogie borrowed it. I don't know. It's just hard to believe Moogie'd do something like that. There were two things you could always count on from Moogie. He was loyal, and he was dumb. We'd say, "Hey, Moogie, how about you run over your dick with a lawnmower?" And he'd say, "Sure, you want me to get a hard-on first?" Maybe he wasn't as dumb as you thought. When we reached Spiro's parking lot, I couldn't resist another shot with the caskets. Kind of funny about you and Kenny and Moogie. Kenny thinks you've got something that belongs to him, and now we think maybe Moogie had something that belonged to you. Spiro draped his left arm over the wheel. His topcoat gaped, and I caught a glimpse of a gun butt and shoulder holster. Maybe you should stop thinking out loud. Maybe you should stop thinking altogether. I'm going to raise my rates if you're going to get cranky. Christ, you're already fucking overpaid. For $100 a night, the least you could do is throw in a blowjob. What I was going to throw in was a nice long time behind bars. It was a comforting thought, and it kept me going while I did my bodyguard thing in his apartment, flipping on lights, scoping out closets, counting dust balls under his bed, and gagging at the soaked scum behind his shower curtain. I gave his place a green light, drove the Lincoln back to the funeral home, and exchanged it for my Buick. I caught Morelli in my rearview mirror when I parked in front of my parents' house. We went over my conversation with Spiro and confirmed our morning schedule, and then I went inside. I let myself into the darkened house and tiptoed into the kitchen. Finding food in my mother's kitchen was a sure thing. I heard the stairs creak and knew from the tread that it was my mother. How did it go at Steva's? It went okay. I pulled out some ham and provolone cheese, and my mother grabbed a knife. Here, let me. You don't slice the ham thin enough. She made each of us a sandwich. You could have invited him in for a sandwich. Spiro? Joe Morelli. My mother never ceased to amaze me. There was a time when you would have chased him out of the house with that carving knife. He's changed. I tore into the sandwich. So he tells me. I hear he's a good cop. Mom, a good cop is different from a good person. I woke up disoriented, staring at a ceiling from a previous life. Grandma Mazur and my father were fighting over the bathroom. My eyes started to twitch, and I squinched it closed. I ran a brush through my hair, grabbed my pocketbook, and rushed into the hall. My mother caught me with my jacket in hand. Where are you going? You haven't had breakfast? I told Spiro I'd pick him up. Spiro can wait. The dead people won't mind if he's 15 minutes late. I made some nice oatmeal and poured you juice. I looked at my watch. If I ate real fast, I could still get to Spiro by 8. I chugged the juice and tried the oatmeal. I added 3 spoons of sugar and some milk. Grandma Mazur took her seat at the table. My hand feels better, but I got the devil of a headache. You should stay home today, Grandma. Take it easy. I'm going to take it easy at Clara's. I look a fright. Don't know how my hair got like this. Besides, I gotta go while I still got the bandage on, and I'm big news. I have things to do first thing this morning, but then I'll be back and I'll take you to Clara's. Don't go without me. I wolfed down the rest of the oatmeal and took off. I didn't see Morelli lurking in Spiro's parking lot, but I assumed he was there. I collected Spiro and headed for the funeral home. When I stopped for the light at Hamilton and Gross, he turned his attention to the Exxon station. Maybe we should stop in and ask a few questions. It would be interesting to see if Moogie was the one who took the caskets. Cubby Delio was working the office. Spiro and I ambled in together. Cubby snapped to attention at the sight of Spiro. Little prick that he was, Spiro still represented Steva's mortuary, and Steva threw a lot of business to the station. All of Steva's cars were serviced and gassed here. "I heard about your arm, Spiro. Damn shame." Spiro passed it off with a wave of his hand. He looked out of the office window at the truck still parked in front of the bay. "I wanted to ask you about the Mako truck. Do you always service that truck?" "Yep. Mako has an account just like you. They got 2 trucks. We do both of them. You looking to get some furniture?" "I'm thinking about it." "It's a good company. Family run. Keep the trucks in real good condition." "Looks like you haven't found a replacement for Moogie." "Thought I had a guy, but he didn't work out. Hard to replace Moogie. When Moogie was running the station, I hardly had to be here. Could take a day off once a week to go to the track. Even after he got shot in the knee, he was still reliable. Still came to work." I suspected Spiro and I had parallel thoughts, and I was thinking that maybe Moogie borrowed the truck on one of those track days. Of course, if he borrowed the truck, someone else would have to be minding the store. Or someone else would have to be driving the truck. Spiro did some oily chit-chat and oozed himself out of the office. I squired Spiro into the funeral parlor, where all security systems seemed intact. I told Spiro I'd return for the night run and that he should beat me if he needed me sooner. I would have liked to keep Spiro under surveillance. I figured he'd be picking at the lead I'd given him, and maybe Kenny would move with him. Unfortunately, I couldn't conduct any meaningful surveillance in Big Blue. At 10, I picked up Grandma Mazur to chauffeur her over to Clara's for an overhaul. Grandma was wearing her blue wool coat. "You're going to be hot in that coat," I told her. "It's not very cold out." "Haven't got anything else. Everything's gone to rags. Maybe after Clara's we could go shopping. I got my Social Security check." I got Grandma settled in Clara's and went outside to wait. Morelli was leaning against the Buick. "What's the plan here?" "Grandma will be done in an hour. I promise I'll take her shopping." "Stephanie, I've been thinking about Sandeman." "Yeah, I've been thinking about Sandeman too. Maybe he screwed Kenny over." "You think Moogie threw in with Sandeman?" I shrugged and told him about Cubby's trip to the track. "It makes sense, Joe. Whoever stole the guns had street contacts." "You said Sandeman didn't show any signs of sudden wealth." "I think Sandeman's wealth goes up his nose." Grandma hoisted herself onto the front seat of the Buick. "I feel much better now that my hair's back in shape. I even had to put a rinse in it. Can you tell the difference?" She'd gone from gunmetal gray to apricot. "It's more of a strawberry blonde now." "Yeah, that's it. Strawberry blonde. I always wanted to be one of those." From there we went shopping. It was late afternoon when we finished. My mother opened the front door for us with a grim set to her mouth. "Mom, I had nothing to do with the hair. Grandma did that all by herself." She looked down at Grandma's shoes and genuflected. "This is my cross to bear?" Grandma Mazur was wearing Doc Martens. She was also wearing a new hip-length down-filled ski jacket, jeans that she'd rolled and pegged, and a flannel shirt to match mine. We looked like Tales from the Crypt does the Bobbsey twins. Grandma began to climb the stairs. "I'm going to take a nap before dinner. Shopping wore me out." My mother looked back at me. "I could use some help in the kitchen?" This was bad news. The only time my mother requested help in the kitchen was when she intended to browbeat some unfortunate soul into submission, or when she wanted information. "Have some chocolate pudding," she'd say to me. "By the way, Mrs. Harrell saw you going into the Morelli's garage with Joseph Morelli. And why are your panties on inside out?" She moved from the oven to the refrigerator. "Some carrots would be nice with the lamb. You can peel the carrots." She handed me the bag and the paring knife. "By the way, why did someone send you a penis?" I almost sliced off the tip of my finger. Seems to me Kenny Mancuso has it in for you. It's not a nice thing to send a penis to a woman. It's disrespectful. I don't really want to talk about the penis. And I know what's going on with your grandmother, too. Kenny Mancuso is getting to you through your grandmother. That's why you're living here, so you can be close by if he attacks her again." She shut the heat off under the potatoes and turned to me. "How good are you at this bounty hunter business?" "I'm learning." "I want you to catch that son of a bitch. I want you to get him off the streets. It's not right that a man like that is free to hurt old women." "I'll do the best I can." She took a can of cranberries from the pantry. "Good. Now that we have things straight, you can set the table." Morelli showed up at 1 minute to 6. I was driving by, doing a security check, and I smelled like a lamb. My mother came up behind me. "Who is it?" "It's Morelli. He was driving by and he smelled the lamb, and he's leaving right now." Mother pushed past me. "She has no manners. I don't know what happened. I didn't raise her like that. Stephanie, lay out an extra plate." After dinner, Morelli and I left the house at 7:30. He trailed after me and parked in Steve's lot when I pulled into the driveway. I locked the Buick and walked over to Morelli. "You have anything to tell me?" I went through invoices from the garage. The truck was in for an oil change at the end of the month. Bucky brought it in around 7 in the morning and picked it up the next day. "Let me guess. Cubby Delia was gone that day. Moogie and Sandeman were working." "Yup. Sandeman signed off on the job. His name was on the invoice." "Have you talked to Sandeman?" "No, I got to the garage right after he left for the night. I checked his room and some bars, but I couldn't find him." "Did you find anything interesting in his room?" "Thought I'd save that little adventure for you." In other words, Morelli didn't want to get caught on a fire escape. I crossed the lot and entered the funeral home through the side door. Word was obviously spreading because Joe Lucy, minus his penis, was laid out in the VIP room and the crowd was packed into the room. Spiro signaled me to follow him into the kitchen. "Do you believe this bunch of losers? They're eating me out of house and home. I should be charging after-hours admission to see Lucy stump." "Anything new from Kenny?" "Nothing. I think he shot his wad. Which brings me to business at hand. I don't need you anymore." "Why the sudden change of heart?" "Things have quieted down." "That's it?" "Yeah, that's it." I went back to Morelli and gave him the news. "Sudden?" "I think Kenny's got the guns. I think we gave Spiro a place to start looking. He passed it on to Kenny, and Kenny lucked out. And now the heat's off Spiro." "It's possible." I had my car keys in hand. "I'm going to check on Sandeman, see if he's come home yet." I parked half a block from Sandeman's rooming house. Morelli parked directly behind me. There was no answer at Sandeman's door. Morelli looked out at the fire escape. A bounty hunter would have the authority to go in after her man. Only if she was convinced her man was in there. Morelli looked at me expectantly. I took a deep breath and angled myself out onto the fire escape. Iron joints groaned, and rusted metal shards flaked off underfoot and fell to the ground. I tried Sandeman's window. It was unlocked. I gave the bottom window a shove, and it rose halfway and stuck. So far as I could see, nothing had changed. I saw no signs of struggle, flight, or affluence. I thought I'd give one more try with the window. I braced my feet and pushed hard against the old wood frame. Masonry bolts tore loose from crumbling brick, and the slatted floor of the fire escape tipped to a 45-degree angle. Stairs slid out of place, railings ripped from their moorings, angle irons wrenched free, and the entire third-floor gridwork crashed onto the second-floor fire escape. There was a momentary pause, long enough for me to whisper, "Ah, shit." Chang! The second-floor fire escape separated from the building and crumbled to the ground, carrying me with it. I landed flat on my back with a solid whomp that knocked the air out of my lungs. I lay there stunned until Morelli's face loomed over me. He felt for the pulse in my neck. Then his hands were on my feet, moving up my legs. "Can you move your toes?" "Your fingers go any higher up my leg, and I'm filing for sexual harassment." I propped myself up on my elbow. "Get me out of here." Morelli gently hoisted me onto my feet. "You sure you're okay?" "Nothing seems broken." I wrinkled my nose. "What is that smell?" "Oh, God, I didn't mess myself, did I?" Morelli turned me around. "Whoa, someone in this building has a big dog. A big, sick dog. And it looks like your head hit ground zero." He drove me to my apartment. "I thought this was best. Didn't think you'd want your mother to see you in this condition." He searched through my pocketbook for the key and opened the door. The apartment felt cool and neglected. The kitchen beckoned to my left. "I need a beer." I tugged at the refrigerator door. The door swung wide, the fridge light went on, and I stared in dumb silence at a foot. A large, filthy, bloody foot, separated from the leg just above the ankle. There's a foot in my refrigerator. Lights flashed, my mouth went numb, and I crashed to the floor. I struggled up from unconscious muck and opened my eyes. Mom? Not exactly. What happened? You fainted. Why don't you go stand in the shower while I take care of things here? 2 uniforms, a crime lab guy, and 2 guys in suits were in my kitchen when I got out of the shower. I went over to Morelli. I've got an idea on the identity of that foot. He was writing on a clipboard. I got the same idea. Eventually, everyone left with the cooler containing the foot. Now what, Morelli? Not much point in staking out Sandeman's place if that was his foot. Now we watched Spiro. We tried driving in Morelli's vehicle, but sick dog odors surrounded us. Morelli was turning green. 5 minutes later, the smell hadn't faded. That's it for me. I'm trading up. We'll use the Buick. Suddenly, I had a new appreciation for the Buick. Morelli pulled up behind Big Blue, and I had the door open and my foot to the pavement while we were still rolling. I stood outside in the crisp air, breathing deep. We got into the Buick together and sat there for a moment, appreciating the lack of odor. The lot was empty when we got to Steva's. Spiro's Lincoln was parked in the drive-thru. The light was on in Spiro's office. I was concerned about our vantage point. We can't see the back entrance from here. True, but the exterior lights work on motion sensors. If someone approaches the back door, the lights will go on. We were parked on the side street, beyond the reach of the street light. Morelli and I sat there in comfortable silence for half an hour, watching the funeral home. Just a couple of old law enforcement partners doing their job. 12 o'clock rolled around. Nothing had changed, and I was feeling antsy. There's something wrong with this. Spiro never stays this late. Maybe he's waiting for someone. I cracked my knuckles. Morelli rested his hand on my back. You're lacking some critical attributes of a good bounty hunter. Like what? Patience. Look at you. You're all tied up in knots. He applied pressure at the base of my neck with his thumb and inched his way up to my hairline. My eyes drooped closed, and my breathing slowed. Feel good? Mm-hmm. You need to relax. If I relax any more, I'll melt and slide off the seat. He worked my shoulders with both hands. I like the melting part. I turned my face toward him, and our eyes held. No, Morelli. Why not? Because I've already seen the movie, and I hate the ending. Maybe it'll have a different ending this time. Maybe it won't. His thumb traced over the pulse in my neck. How about the middle of the movie? Did you like the middle? The middle of the movie had smoked. I've seen better middles. Morelli's face creased into a wide grin. Liar. Was this what I wanted? Sex in a Buick with Joe Morelli? No. Maybe. He leaned forward and kissed me. He kissed me again, and I thought, well, what the hell? Morelli pushed my shirt aside and slipped the straps of my bra over my shoulders. I felt a shiver ripple through me, and chose to believe the shiver was from the cool air, as opposed to a premonition of doom. So, you're sure the light will go on? Yeah. Morelli lowered his mouth to my breast. Nothing to worry about. Nothing to worry about? He had his hand in my pants, and he was telling me I had nothing to worry about. My eyes rolled to the top of my head again. What was my problem? I was an adult. I had needs. What was so wrong about satisfying those needs once in a while? I did a fast check of the windows. Totally fogged. That was good. Okay, I said to myself, go for it. I kicked my shoes off and stripped of everything but my black string bikinis. Now, you. I want to see you. It took less than 10 seconds for him to get undressed, 5 seconds of which he used up on guns and cuffs. Morelli was even more amazing than I'd remembered, and I'd remembered him as being freaking outstanding. He hooked a finger under my bikini string and in one fluid movement removed my panties. He tried to mount me and hit his head on the steering wheel. Been a long time since I've done this in a car. We scrambled to the back and fell together, Morelli in an unbuttoned, pre-washed denim shirt and white sweat socks, and me in a fresh rush of uncertainty. Spiro could kill the lights, and Kenny could sneak in the back door. Morelli kissed my shoulder. The feds would know if Kenny was in the house. How? I wired the house. I pushed away. You didn't tell me. What else haven't you told me? That's it, I swear. I didn't believe it for a second. He was wearing his cop face. I thought back to dinner and how he'd miraculously appeared. How did you know my mother was cooking lamb? I smelled it when you opened the door. Bullshit! I grabbed my purse from the front seat and dumped the contents between us. Hairbrush, hairspray, lipstick, pepper spray, travel pack of tissues, stun gun, gum, sunglasses, black plastic transformer. Fuck. You son of a bitch! You wired my pocketbook. It was for your own good. I was worried about you. That's despicable. That's an invasion of privacy. It was also a lie. He was afraid I'd get a beat on Kenny and not cut him in. I rolled the window down and threw the transformer out into the street. Shit, that thing's worth $400. He opened the door and went out to retrieve it. I pulled the door closed and locked it. I climbed over the seat and slid behind the wheel. Morelli tried the passenger side door, but all the doors were locked and they were going to stay that way. I revved the engine and took off, leaving him standing in the middle of the street in his shirt and socks with his Woody hanging half-mast. Probably it wasn't a good idea to leave a cop standing naked in the middle of the street. What would happen if a bad guy came along? I made a U-turn and retraced to the side street. Morelli was right where I'd left him, hands on his hips, looking disgusted. I slowed, rolled my window down, and tossed him his gun, just in case. Then I floored it and roared away. I awoke and, following my nose to coffee brewing in the kitchen, found Morelli eating breakfast at the table. Mom was smiling. From the look of his plate, Morelli just finished bacon and eggs and toast. His expression was speculative. Morning. I poured coffee into a mug. Morning, Morelli. What's new? Nothing. Your paycheck is still out there. You come by to tell me that? I came by to get my wallet. I think I left it in your car last night. I took a slurp of coffee and set the cup on the counter. I'll get your wallet. Morelli stood and smiled at my mother. Thank you for breakfast. It was wonderful. My mother beamed. Any time. Always nice to have Stephanie's friends here. He followed me out to the car and scooped his clothes together. I said, Were you telling the truth about Kenny? He didn't show up last night. Spiro stayed until a little after 2. He was waiting for something that never happened. He glanced over at the house and then back at me. If your mother wasn't standing at the door, I'd grab you and shake you until the fillings fell out of your teeth. Police brutality. It has nothing to do with being a cop. It has to do with being Italian. I handed him his shoes. I'd really like to be in on the takedown. I'll do the best I can to include you. We locked eyes. Did I believe him? No. When I came into the house, Grandma Missouri was finishing breakfast. How's your hand, Grandma? Does it hurt? Only hurts if I make a fist. And I can't do that with the big bandage on. I'd be in a pickle if it had been my right hand. Got any plans for today? Not until tonight. Joe Lucy is still laid out. I thought I'd like to go see the rest of him at the 7 o'clock viewing. I could have gone about my business, but I didn't want to leave Grandma Missouri alone. Grandma, I need to keep some people under surveillance. You want to tag along? I guess I could do that. You think it'll get rough? No, I think it'll be boring. Are we looking for that miserable Kenny Mancuso? Yep. Then I'm all for it. I have a score to settle with him. Half an hour later, she was ready to go, wearing her jeans and ski jacket and Doc Martens. I parked a block down from Steve's on Hamilton. Grandma pulled out the canvas tote bag she'd hauled along. I know all about how to do this stakeout stuff. I got everything we need in here. I got magazines to pass the time. I got sandwiches and sodas. We read the magazines and tore out a few recipes. We ate the sandwiches and drank the sodas. Grandma yawned after a few hours. You're right. This is boring. We just started 20 questions when I glanced out the window at oncoming traffic and recognized Kenny Mancuso. He was driving a 2-tone Chevy Suburban that looked to be as big as a bus. I fumbled with the ignition key. Shit! Grandma swiveled in her seat to keep him in sight. Get the car moving! Don't let that son of a skunk get away! I wrenched the gear shift into drive and was about to pull out when I realized Kenny had U-turned at the intersection and was closing ground between us. There were no cars parked behind me. I saw the Suburban swerve to the curb and told Grandma to brace herself. The Suburban crashed into the back of the Buick. bouncing us forward into Morelli's empty car, which crashed into the car in front of him. Kenny backed the Suburban up, stepped on the gas, and rammed us again. Grandma pulled a .45 long barrel out of her tote bag. "Well, that takes it. I'm too old for this kind of bouncing around. I got delicate bones at my age." She wrenched her door open and scrambled out onto the sidewalk. "Guess this will show you something." She aimed the gun at the Suburban and pulled the trigger. Fire flashed from the barrel, and the kick knocked her on her ass. Kenny floored the Suburban in reverse all the way to the intersection and took off. Grandma Missouri got to her feet. "Did I get him?" "Nope." She had her hand to her forehead. "Hit myself in the head with a dang gun." We walked around the cars, surveying the damage. The Buick was virtually unscathed, a scratch in the chrome on the big back bumper. Morelli's car looked like an accordion. The hood and the trunk lid were crumpled, and all the lights were broken. I looked up the street, expecting Morelli to come running, but Morelli was nowhere in sight. "Are you okay, Grandma?" "Sure. I would have got that slime ball, too, if it wasn't for my injury. I had to shoot with one hand." "Where'd you get the .45? "My friend Elsie loaned it to me. She got it in a yard sale." She rolled her eyes up in her head. "Am I bleeding?" "No, but you got a notch in your forehead. Maybe we should take you home to rest." "That might be a good idea. My knees feel sort of rubbery." Half an hour later, Morelli came knocking at my parents' door. Before he could scream, I explained what happened, which took some convincing. In the end, Morelli studied his shoes for a beat and then glanced over at the Buick. "No damage." "Scratched the rear bumper." I thought it was time to remind Morelli of my usefulness. "Did you run a check on Spiro's guns?" They all checked out. Registered nice and legal. So much for usefulness. My mother leaned out from inside. "Stephanie, are you out there without a coat? You're going to catch your death." Morelli draped his jacket on my shoulders. "Speaking of death, they found a body to go with your foot. It floated into one of the bridge supports this morning." "Sandman?" "Yeah. Kenny's lost it, hasn't he?" "Big time." Steve's lot was already filled at 7 o'clock, and cars lined the curb for 2 blocks down Hamilton. I double-parked just short of the service driveway and told Grandma she should go in without me. She changed into a dress and the big blue coat and looked very colorful marching up Steve's front steps with her apricot hair. I circled the block twice before finding a spot. I entered through the side door and steeled myself against the claustrophobic hothouse heat and crowd murmur. When this was over, I was never again going into a funeral parlor. I didn't care who died. I put my head down and muscled my way into the room where Joe Lucy was laid out. Eventually, I elbowed to the front and reached the casket and the widow Lucy. I'd expected Grandma to have insinuated herself into the space reserved for the immediate family. "I'm sorry for your loss. Have you seen Grandmother Missouri?" Mrs. Lucy looked alarmed. "Edna is here." "I dropped her off about 10 minutes ago. I expected she'd have come to pay her respects." Mrs. Lucy put a protective hand on the casket. "I haven't seen her." I pushed through the crowd, asking if anyone had seen Grandma Missouri. The answers were negative. I checked the kitchen, the ladies' room, the porch at the side door. I questioned everyone in my path. No one had seen a little old lady in a big blue coat. Prickles of alarm had begun to dance along my spine. I walked upstairs and prowled through the second-story rooms where caskets and files were stored. The rooms were all empty. I went out and made my way to the side entrance. I scanned the parking lot and continued on to the garages at the rear, without success. The door to the cellar was locked, but the service door to the kitchen was open. I let myself in and did another run-through of the house, trying the door to the workrooms and finding it sealed tight as promised. I slipped into Spiro's office and dialed Ranger. I told him my problem and that I might need help. I returned to the lobby and Spiro was at the front door, looking sour. "I can't find Grandma Missouri." "Congratulations." "It's not funny. I'm worried about her." "You should be. She's nuts." "Have you seen her?" "No. And it's the only decent thing that's happened to me in 2 days. The only place I haven't looked is in the basement." "She isn't in the basement. The door is locked." "Just let me look." Spiro glanced at his watch. "You're going to have to wait until hours are over. I can't leave these ghouls unsupervised." "Where's Louie?" "Has a day off. Let me into the cellar, and I swear I won't bother you anymore." Well, that's a cheery thought. An old man clapped a hand on Sparrow's shoulder. Hey, how's Con doing? He out of the hospital yet? Yeah, he's out of the hospital. He'll be back to work next week, Monday. Sparrow crossed to the other side of the lobby, slithering between knots of people, ignoring some, toadying up to others. I followed him to the cellar door and waited impatiently while he fumbled with the keys. If Grandma had been forcibly removed from the house, Morelli would have acted, unless she'd been taken up the back door. The back door was the blind spot. Still, he'd compensated for that by planting a bug, and if the bugs were working, Morelli would have heard me looking for Grandma and would be doing his thing. I flipped the stairwell light switch. Grandma? A small circle of light brightened the cellar floor at the bottom of the stairs. My stomach clenched. Someone was down there. I could feel it, just as surely as I could feel Spiro's breath on my neck. The meter's running, Cookie. You going down there or what? I rummaged through my pocketbook for my .38 and descended the stairs with gun drawn. Stephanie Plum, chicken shit bounty hunter, takes stairs one at a time. I steadied myself on the last step, reached left, and flipped the light switch. Nothing happened. Hey, Spiro, the lights won't go on. He hunkered down at the top of the stairs. Must be the circuit breaker. Where's the box? To your right, behind the furnace. I reached for my flashlight, and before I could withdraw my hand from my pocketbook, Kenny sprang out of the shadows. He hit me from the side, and we both crashed to the floor, the jolt sending my .38 skittering off into the dark, beyond my grasp. I scrambled to my feet, and was slammed flat onto my chest. A knee jammed between my shoulder blades, and there was the prick of something very sharp pressed against the side of my neck. You move an inch, and I'll shove this knife into your throat. I heard the door close at the top of the stairs, heard Spiro hurry down. Kenny, what the hell are you doing down here? How'd you get in? I got in through the cellar door. I used the key you gave me. Came back to check on things. You make me nervous. I make you nervous? Let me tell you the difference between you and me. This is all business for me. I act like a professional. Somebody stole the casket, so I hired an expert to find them. I didn't go around shooting my partner in the knee because I was pissed. And I wasn't so stupid that I used a fucking stolen gun to shoot him with and then got myself caught by an off-duty cop. I wasn't so fucking nuts that I thought my partners were plotting against me. And I didn't go wacko over Sweetie Pie here. You know what your problem is, Kenny? You get on an idea and you can't get off. You get obsessed with shit, and then you can't see anything else, and you always have to be the fucking show-off. You could have gotten rid of Sandeman nice and quiet, but no. You had to hack off his fucking foot. Kenny chuckled. Yeah, I'll tell you what your problem is, Spiro. You don't know how to have fun. Always the serious undertaker. You should try sticking that big-bore needle into something alive for a change. You're sick. Yeah, you're not so healthy yourself. You've spent enough time watching me work my magic. I could hear Spiro shift behind me. You're talking too much. Doesn't matter. Sweetie Pie isn't gonna tell anyone. She and her grandma are gonna disappear. Fine by me, just don't do it here. I don't want to be involved. Spiro crossed the room, flipped the circuit breaker, and the lights flashed on. 5 crated caskets lined one wall, and a jumble of crates and boxes had been stacked next to the back door. I could guess the contents of the crates and boxes. I don't get it. Why did you bring the stuff here? Con is coming back to work on Monday. How will you keep this from him? It'll be gone by Monday. We brought everything in yesterday so we could take inventory. Sandeman was carrying the whole shitload around in his pickup, doing fucking tailgate sales. Lucky for us, you saw the furniture truck at Delio's. Another couple of weeks with Sandeman running loose and nothing would have been left. I don't know how you got it in, but you'll never get it out. Morelli is watching the house. Kenny snorted. It goes out the same way it came in the meat wagon. Kenny stood up and yanked me to my feet. The cops don't watch the slumber coach and Louis Moon, or at least who they think is Louis Moon behind those tinted windows. Not bad. They dressed Kenny up to look like Louis Moon, brought the guns and ammo to the funeral home in the hearse, parked the hearse in the garage, and then all they had to do was run the boxes between the garage and the back door to the cellar. And Morelli couldn't see the back door to the cellar. They probably couldn't hear anything in the cellar either. I didn't think it likely that they would have bugged the cellar. Spiro looked around. So, what's with the old lady? She was in the kitchen looking for a tea bag and saw me cutting across the lawn. Spiro's face tightened. Did she tell anybody? No. She came barreling out of the house, yelling at me for stabbing her in the hand, telling me I needed to learn respect for old people. I preferred to squash the panic clawing at my stomach and replace it with some more constructive emotion. How about cool reasoning? Nope, I didn't have any of that available. How about cunning? Sorry, low on cunning. How about anger? Did I have any anger? Fucking A. I pulled the anger in until it was hard and razor sharp. Now what, Kenny? Where do we go from here? Now we put you on ice for a while, until the house empties out. Then I'll see what kind of mood I'm in. We have a bunch of options, being that we're in a funeral parlor. Hell, we could strap you to the table and embalm you while you're still alive. That would be fun. He pressed the tip of the knife blade to the back of my neck. Walk. Where? He jerked his head. Over to the corner. The crated caskets were stacked in the corner. To the caskets? He smiled and prodded me forward. The caskets come later. I realized the caskets weren't flush to the wall. Tucked behind the caskets was a refrigeration unit with 2 body drawers. Gonna be nice and dark in there. Give you time to think. Fear slid down my spine and sickened my stomach. Grandma Mazur, turning into a popsicle, even as we speak. No, let her out. She's no threat to you. Let her go. No threat? Are you kidding? That old lady is criminally insane. You know what it took to get her in that drawer? Spiro followed us. She's probably dead by now anyway. Kenny looked at him. You think so? How long's she been in there? Maybe 10 minutes. Spiro stuffed his hands into his pockets. You lower the temperature? Nah, I just shoved her in. Then, probably, it's only around room temperature. Yeah, but she could have died from fright. What do you think? You think she's dead, sweetie pie? A sob stuck in my chest. Kenny said, Maybe we should open the drawer and see if that old bag's breathing. Spiro released the latch and yanked the door open. He grabbed the end of the stainless steel tray and slowly rolled it toward him. The first thing I saw was Grandma Mazur's shoes pointing toes up, then Grandma's bony shin, her big blue coat, arms rigidly at her sides, hands under the folds of the coat. I felt myself sway under a wave of grief. I forced air into my lungs and blinked to clear my vision. The tray reached its full extension and clicked into place. Grandma stared unflinching at the ceiling, eyes open, mouth set, still as stone. We all gaped at her in silence for several moments. Kenny was the first to speak. She looks dead, all right. Roll her back in. The whisper of a sound stuck in the corner. A hiss. I saw the very slightest tightening around Grandma's eye. The hiss again, louder this time. Grandma sucking air through her dentures. Maybe she's not dead yet. You should have cranked the unit down, Kenny. This baby'll go down to 0. She wouldn't have lasted 10 minutes. Grandma made some feeble movements on the tray. Spiro stepped back. What's she doing? She's trying to sit up, but she's too old. Can't get those old bones to cooperate, huh, Granny? Grandma pursed her lips. Old? I'll show you, old. Kenny pushed Spiro. Shove the drawer back in and fix the freezer setting. Spiro started to roll the tray in, but Grandma kicked out with her feet, stopping the slide. Spiro grunted and rammed the tray home, but the tray was inches short of clicking into place, and the door wouldn't close. Something's stuck. This won't go in all the way. Kenny held on to me. Open it up and see what's wrong. Spiro eased the tray back. Grandma's chin appeared. Her nose, her eyes, her arms were extended over her head. Kenny stepped forward. You making problems, Granny? You jamming the drawer with something? Grandma didn't say anything. Get your arms down at your sides. Stop fucking with me. I'm gonna lose my patience. Grandma struggled to get her arms out, and finally her bandaged hand popped free. The other hand followed, and in it was the .45 long barrel. She swung her arms straight from the shoulder and squeezed off a round. We all hit the floor, and she fired again. Silence followed the second shot. No one moved but Grandma. She elbowed herself to a sitting position and took a moment to settle. "I know what you're thinking. Do I have any more bullets in this here gun? Well, with all the confusion, with being locked up in a refrigerator, I plumb forgot what was in here to start with. But being that this is a .45 Magnum, the most powerful handgun in existence, and it could blow your head clean off, you just gotta ask yourself one question. Do you feel lucky today? Well, do you, punk?" Bam! Grandma fired and knocked out a light. Dang, must be something wrong with this sight. Kenny scrambled to the ammo cases to get a gun. Spiro ran for the stairs, and I inched toward Grandma on my belly. Bam! She got another shot off. It missed Kenny, but it tore into one of the cases. There was an instant explosion, and a fireball rose to the basement ceiling. I jumped to my feet and dragged Grandma off the tray. Another case exploded. Fire crackled across the floor and traced along the wooden casket casings. I didn't know what was exploding, but I knew we were lucky not to have been hit by flying fragments. Smoke roiled from the burning boxes, cutting into the light, stinging my eyes. I yanked Grandma to the back door and shoved her out into the yard. "Are you okay?" "He was gonna kill me. He was gonna kill you, too." "Yes. Can you walk around to the front of the building? Can you find Morelli and tell him I'm back here?" Grandma lurched toward the driveway. "If he's there, I'll find him." Kenny had been on the opposite side of the cellar when we rushed to get out. Either he'd gone up the stairs, or he was still inside, making his way close to the floor, trying to get to the back door. I was putting my money on the latter. Too many people at the top of the stairs. I was standing about 20 feet from the door, and I wasn't sure what I'd do if Kenny appeared. I didn't have a gun or defense spray. There was another small explosion, and flames flared through the kitchen windows. People shouted from the street, and I could hear sirens in the distance. Smoke poured through the cellar door and swirled around a human form, a hellish creature backlit by fire. Kenny. He bent at the waist and coughed and took in some air. His hands hung loose at his sides. Didn't look like he'd been able to find a gun. He was going to skirt the garage and disappear into the back alleys of the burg. He moved stealthily forward, silent against the roar of the fire. He was less than 5 feet away when he saw me. He stopped short, startled, and our eyes locked. He lunged at me on an oath, and we both went down, kicking and clawing. I gave him a good shot with my knee and stuck my thumb in his eye. Kenny howled and pushed off, rising to a crouch. I grabbed for his foot, and he went down again, hard on his knees. We did more rolling on the ground. He was bigger and stronger than me. What I had on my side was anger. This was about Grandma. I squeezed my hand tight in a fist and swung into him backhand, landing a blow that sent shockwaves up my arm. There'd been a crunch and a gasp, and I saw him flail out in the darkness, arms wide open. I grabbed hold of his shirt and shouted for help. His hands clamped onto my neck, his breath hot on my face. "Die!" Maybe, but he'd go down with me. I had his shirt in a death grip. If he strangled me unconscious, I'd still have my fingers dug into his shirt. The only way he was going to get away was to take the damn thing off. I was so focused on the shirt it took me a while to realize the pack had enlarged to 3. Morelli was pulling me up. "Let go of his shirt. He'll get away." "He won't get away, I got him." I looked beyond Morelli and saw Ranger around the corner of the house with 2 uniforms. Kenny was holding his jaw. "Get her off me! Jesus, these plum bitches are goddamn animals!" There was another crunch in the darkness, and I suspected Morelli had accidentally broken something belonging to Kenny, like his nose, maybe. It was nice to be back in my apartment, and it was nice to feel safe. Kenny was locked up without bail, and I expected he'd be locked up for a good long time, hopefully for life. 9 o'clock in the morning, and I was going to take a shower in my very own bathroom. I loved my bathroom. There was a knock at the door. I squinted through the peephole. It was Morelli. "Thought you'd want to get filled in on some details." I opened the door to him and stepped back. "Kenny talked?" Morelli moved into the foyer. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes ticked off the details of his surroundings. Always the cop. "Enough to piece things together. Turns out there were 3 conspirators, just as we thought. Kenny, Moogie, and Spiro. And they each had a key to the storage locker." One for all and all for one. More like nobody trusted anybody else. Kenny was the brains behind it all. He planned the theft, and he had an overseas buyer for the stolen ammo. The phone numbers to Mexico and El Salvador. Yeah, he also got a nice advance, which he spent ahead of time. Yup. Then he went to the locker to get the stuff ready for shipment. And guess what? No stuff? Yup again. Why are you wearing your jacket? I just got in. I looked wistfully toward the bathroom. I was about to take a shower. No, Just tell me about Sandeman. Where does Sandeman figure in? Sandeman heard some conversations between Moogie and Spiro and got curious. So, he tapped into one of the many skills he acquired during a life of petty crime, duped the locker key off Moogie's keyring, and by process of lengthy elimination, found the locker. Who killed Moogie? Sandeman. He got nervous. Thought Moogie might have eventually figured out about the borrowed furniture truck. And Sandeman told all of this to Kenny? Kenny can be very persuasive. There was no doubt in my mind. Morelli stepped closer, played with the zipper on my jacket. About that shower. I pointed with straight arm and extended finger to my door. Out! Don't you want to know about Spiro? What about Spiro? We haven't caught him yet. He's probably gone underground. Morelli winced. I smiled. That's Undertaker humor. One more thing. Kenny had an interesting spin on how the fire got started. Lies. All lies. You could have avoided a lot of terror if you just left that bug in your pocketbook. I narrowed my eyes and crossed my arms over my chest. This is a subject best forgotten. You left me standing bare-assed in the middle of the street. I gave you your gun, didn't I? Morelli grinned. You're gonna give me more than that, Cupcake. Forget it. Not likely. You owe me. I owe you nothing. If anyone is owed, it's me. I caught your cousin for you. And in the process burned down Steve's mortuary and destroyed thousands of dollars worth of government property. Well, if you're going to be picky about it. Picky? You are the worst bounty hunter in the history of the world. That does it. I have better things to do than to stand here and take your insults. I pushed him out of my foyer, into the hall, slammed the door closed, and threw the bolt. I pressed my nose to the door and looked through the peephole. Morelli grinned at me. This is war, Morelli. Lucky for me, I give good war.
Two for the Dough was written by Janet Ivanovich and read by Lori Petty. It was abridged for audio by Matt Fenton. Editing and post-production by Common Moan. Paul Fowley, technical director. Music mix by Jocelyn Gonzalez. The associate producer was Sloan Seaman. The director was Linda Wollman. Two for the Dough was produced by Jan Werner. This has been a presentation of Simon & Schuster Audio. Two for the Dough is available in hardcover from Scribner. Also available from Simon & Schuster Audio, Janet Ivanovich's One for the Money.